Good evening. Welcome to this meeting of the Children's Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 6th of September 2023, which is being live streamed on the Council's website. I'm Councillor Andrew Mickleborough, the Chair of the committee. The committee consists of elected councillors and community representatives. The role of Overview and Scrutiny is to provide rigorous, independent, critical friend challenge and to work with the Council's executive and other public service providers for the benefit of our public. The committee considers recommendations from a range of sources and reaches conclusions and makes recommendations to the executive based on the weight of evidence. Agenda item 25, do we have any apologies?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Item 26, any declarations of interest from committee members? No, thank you.
Yeah, I don't know. Do I need to declare I'm an advisor at school that's part of an academy trust? It's not a Wokingham Borough school. Do I need to declare that as an interest?
Have you declared that before in a previous meeting?
No, but I noticed in the minutes that a couple of people have declared.
Yeah, if you could, okay, and then it won't need to be declared again in another time. So if you could do that, please.
I declare an interest as an advisor at West End Junior School.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Jane. Okay, agenda item 27, minutes of the previous meetings. Now, there are two meetings. The first is on the 20th of June. Please note that most matters arising from these minutes will be included in the action tracker on pages 115 to 118, which we will consider under agenda item 39. So if we can deal with the minutes of the meeting 20th of June, are there any points of accuracy in the minutes of that meeting that people would like to raise? Thank you.
In the list of those who are present, there isn't a list for non-councillors and non-officers. So I was present.
We'll sort that out.
Okay, thank you for drawing our attention to that. Does that also apply to the minutes for the? Thank you very much, Richard. Okay, and I do apologise. Thank you. Okay, with that note. Okay, would somebody like to propose that we accept the minutes, the meeting the 20th of June, and a seconder? Someone who's here? Thank you, Phil. Okay, and a show of hands. Those who were present at that meeting, thank you very much. Okay, and then the same for the meeting of the 15th of August. Any questions at all about points of accuracy in those minutes? No. Can we have a proposer, please? Thank you, Ian, and seconder. Thank you, Graham. Okay, those in favour? Thank you very much. Okay. I'll sign both sets of minutes at the end of this meeting. Public question time. Okay. We have one question from a Mr. Amit Mehta. Is Mr. Mehta online? No. Okay. Now, given the brevity of the question and also the response to that question, I do propose on this occasion to read both the question and the answer, and then we will send Mr. Mehta a written response as well. So Mr. Mehta's question was, we have been visiting various schools for our 4-year-old to understand the method and procedure used within schools towards education. Some of the schools mentioned as a borough, we are looking to move away from reward system and move towards a therapeutic approach of teaching within borough primary schools. If the above is correct, can I please request if there's a general strategy document which I can access and understand? What does that mean at an execution / operational level or day-to-day in the school setting? So thank you for your question, Mr. Mehta. The government provides guidance for all schools nationally on behaviour in schools, which can be found at a link which will be included in the emailed response. It's titled Behaviour in Schools Guidance. It is for each individual school to interpret this guidance at a local level in a meaningful way for the community that they serve and in line with their school ethos, culture and values. Every school should have its own behaviour policy, which is available to parents and carers to help them understand the ways in which the school supports and promotes excellent behaviour in school. As a local authority, We do not issue schools in the borough with a policy directive on the day-to-day management of pupil behaviour in their schools. This is for each school to decide. An electronic version of that response will be sent to Mr. Mehta. Now, before we move on, okay, I am very grateful that we have present tonight some members of our Children's Services social work team who are all busy and often work very, very long hours, including tomorrow morning. So I would like to propose that to help them, we switch the order of agenda items 31 and 30, and that we move now to consider social worker, agenda item 31, social worker recruitment and retention. I believe that we may be beginning with a short presentation. Is that correct?
Chair, yes, I believe we are. And,
Oh, sorry.
Vicky has
I've
gone to collect the
Okay.
the staff members.
And I've
Yeah.
made a terrible blunder. Okay, I have forgotten item 29, member question time. Were there no questions? Phew. Right. I thought you might have snuck in a sneaky member question. Okay, so we're just waiting for Vicky, okay, to come back. Okay. 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 Now, before we begin with a little short presentation, I'd just like to thank all the social workers who are present with us for this agenda item, both for your attendance tonight and for all the work that you and all of your colleagues do to support our young people and their families. Our committee is really keen to listen and to learn from you, including any matters that might form the basis for recommendations to the executive. So please, please, please do speak with us tonight, okay, because we're here to listen and to learn. Okay, so who is beginning with the short presentation? Vicky. Okay. Reminder, Vicky, we have all seen the presentation as well, so if we can keep it wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a little bit of background before I introduce you to our amazing social work team who are here tonight. Just a little bit about the workforce. I don't know whether you will be aware of this, but just to give you some concepts of the size of our social work workforce. So we have 85.4 FTE qualified social work staff, budgeted qualified social work staff, I should say, in children's services. So that's team manager and below. Over 8 teams, so covering a number of specialisms, and I've listed them there, and you would have seen them in the paper, I'm sure, or you'll be aware of those. Crucially, we've got roughly 25% of our 85.4 FTE filled by agency workers, and this is something that we have been working very hard to reduce, and I'll explain a little bit more about the rationale behind that in a second. That's ranged over the last 12 months, you see, from 22 to 30%, so it appears now to be levelling out around 24-25%. And so what we're going to be doing in the very near future is looking very carefully about how we can stop that levelling out and start that trend towards that reducing again. That said, we do have a lot of our workers who stay with us for a long time. So 50% of our current workers have been with us over 2 years, some many more than that. And just 29%, so less than the 50% have been with us for under 12 months. So there's a good spread of experience there. How we compare, it's quite interesting. So I've used the end of June figure, 24.2% agency, and compared it with the published February 23 figures in the workforce return. So we have an annual return of our workforce figures. You can see that we fare quite well amongst our neighbouring boroughs. So we are, well, apart from Bracknell Forest, we are low, but that doesn't mean we're where we want to be at all. And this is why. So what's very, very important for children and young people is a stable workforce. Now, stability doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that it has to be permanent workers, but by and large, permanent workers are the ones who come here for the long haul. We have agency workers who come in who are exceptionally good, but what they tend to do is specialise in short-term work. So what we want is to have as many as possible permanent workers so that we build that stability for parents and families. And for children, of course, and young people. So why? So, see what it says here. So workers know children well and develop trusted long-term relationships, and that's crucial for children to really get the best outcomes you possibly can. It builds knowledge and expertise and improves practice quality in teams, develops a knowledge of the local area, because it gives time for that to happen and build, and the particular challenge, understanding of the particular challenges children face in Wokingham. And it allows leadership and management to focus not on recruitment and that constant churn, but to focus on practice and achieving excellence. And it promotes, hopefully you'll agree with me, team bonding as well, and having a team that can support each other very, very well. So that's why. So this is just something about. Moved on. There we go. This is something just about our local approach to recruitment and retention. Then, given given what I said about that importance of stability and having a permanent workforce, what I should probably draw your attention to first, actually, the challenges. So, I'm sure you'll be aware that we have a known national shortage of qualified social workers, and that's both permanent and agency. So it's not that if we don't have a permanent workforce, we find it easy to attract agency staff. It's across the board. What that means is that other authorities, and this will affect us, are starting to increase their salaries to become more competitive. So that leaves us in a position where we have a gap between our salary and that of our neighbouring authorities. And so you see this inflation in response to that shortage. However, we have had some success. So we employ a specialist recruitment and retention member of the team who is focused entirely on that, so entirely on social work and recruitment and retention. We have a really robust strategy. Our newly qualified social worker, which we call the Assessed and Supported Year in Employment programme workers, we're doing very well with, I hope. We'll find out shortly. But that's been an incredibly successful programme, and we work very hard to make that work. We focused on creating a really nurturing environment, so a place where social workers hopefully want to be and want to stay for the long term, and they can see their future here. We've recruited practice assistants to assist social workers in the teams to take away some of those tasks that stop them from doing face-to-face work with children and young people. We have a really comprehensive training offer. We now have a new progression route and process, so it should be very clear to social workers how they can progress, move forward, and be promoted. Our agency percentage has decreased, whereas it's not where we want it to be. It has decreased over time, and I say at the moment it's levelling out. But we started around about 32%, and then we had COVID kick in. It went right down to 15%, not surprisingly, because people weren't moving around during that time, and then it started to creep up again, then has come down again. But over time, the trend is downwards. And we have had some success in converting some of our agency staff to permanent workers, which is fantastic. And we are very keen on making sure we have manageable caseloads. The opportunities for us now are to make sure that we invest in our pipeline of new workers, to make sure that we are filling those vacancies that are covered by agency staff, and that we are making sure that we recruit people who want to stay with us for the long term. So we gradually reduce that down. And we are now talking about apprenticeships as well. So there is a social work apprenticeship. It's a 3-year apprenticeship. We would take somebody on here and train them here. They would go away and do placements elsewhere or placements with us. What's good about that programme is that it's a national programme. It means that not only are we growing the cohort of social workers, we have some very talented staff here who would like to become social workers, but just don't have the opportunity or can't afford it, and who are very loyal to us. And so if we were able to offer that to our best staff, we believe they'd stay with us as well for the long term. So I think that's enough of me speaking for now. Just to introduce you then to our amazing team members, I'll hand you over to Rachel Bedford, who's our principal social worker, to introduce if that's all right. Thanks, Rachel. There you go.
I'll have to hold it.
Yeah, is that better? Okay, good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for inviting us along this evening. I know that you've probably got a packed agenda, so I will give a fairly brief summary, but I'll just give you a little bit of context. So as Vicky explained, our ASYE stands for, as Vicky said, basically Assess Supported Year in Employment. And this was a scheme that was brought in from the Social Work Reform Board in 2012. Which is a national kind of government kind of overseen programme. And it was in response to employer surveys nationally again across local authorities where social workers at that point, sort of 2009 to 2012, newly qualified, were leaving in really high numbers, not just leaving their local authorities, but actually leaving the profession as well. And so the ASYE was brought in to try and help remedy that. And it was kind of early adopters where a few local authorities kind of got on board with this new initiative. But now it's sort of standard against all local authorities will have an ASYE programme. And sometimes they call it an academy. And we can see why that was brought in, having been social workers ourselves. In terms of social workers leaving and feeling burned out, we ourselves, without being too negative, can see the potential for that. It's an incredibly difficult job to do well, even if you've got some life experience or, you're fresh-faced young graduate. You are basically, without giving you a long list, you are dealing sometimes with parents who have had really difficult traumatic lives themselves, that don't mean to get into situations where children are abused or neglected. Sometimes we all learn about being a good parent from our own experiences, but a lot of families don't have that. And social workers' kind of priority is to strengthen families and keep them together. But inevitably, they are making really difficult assessments, assimilating a lot of information, having very difficult conversations, making complex judgments with parents who are sometimes angry, upset, resistant. And so you can see with all that work across 20 cases, 20 cases, you are running around a lot. The energy level is substantial and you're spinning a lot of plates and you are dealing with high levels of emotion most of the time. Would you guys agree? Yeah. And so we absolutely need to protect and nurture our workforce. And I always say people over process. So I'm sure many of you have been, you employ people or you're employees yourself. And we all know this across any organisation, our staff are absolutely our greatest asset and we have to look after them and we have to skill them up and give them opportunities to emotionally kind of debrief with us and keep them strong, really. And so back to kind of Wokinham's ASYE, I've been heading up our programme since 2018 and I've been really lucky that Wokingham have really seen the value of it and invested in it. So over the next couple of years, I was really lucky to have colleagues Emma Cobb and Jo Salmon, who's with us tonight. Emma can't make it. So between the three of us, we've got over 50 years of social work experience ourselves. We didn't go into senior management roles. We're really passionate about practice and wanted to kind of stay at that level, kind of mentoring and kind of coaching workers. With obviously Wokingham small, but our retention rate over the last 5 years has been 77%, which is really good. And I was really proud because before we got into the Great Resignation, where lots of people left and relocated, it was actually 89%. So our newly qualified workers stay with us and often, generally, they will sometimes become senior practitioners or they'll go into management roles. So there's good career progression for them. We do have some oversight and scrutiny separately from Skills for Care, which is a kind of Department of Education sort of separate body. No? That's fine. Sorry, Jo. They came to inspect us in February this year and they basically said we were running a really solid programme. So, and they met with managers in our ASYE cohort as well. So I feel like I've spoken enough about why it's important and our sort of success rate, and totally agree that it's all about the pipeline. Not only, as Vicky said, it's a kind of more cost-effective way of kind of having a workforce that is permanent, but absolutely in relation to parents and children, it's really distressing and difficult for them to tell their stories to repeated social workers. It's not a good outcome, and it's one of our kind of key performance indicators as well, rightly so. So I've probably said enough. I'm going to pass you over to Jo, who's just going to tell you a little bit, because she works more closely. So I oversee the programme, but Jo Salmon is absolutely right there with our ASYE workers, meeting them regularly and involved in a lot of events. So she'll quickly tell you a little bit about that.
It's stayed on now. That's good. Hi, everybody. So I'm Jo, and I have a colleague, Emma Cobb, and we do the same job together. So whatever I do, Emma does as well, and we kind of split the cohort in half each year. So first of all, just briefly, just to say the type of support that we provide, there are certain things kind of laid down by Skills for Care, and there's a combination of seeing them individually and seeing them jointly as a group. But we would see them as a minimum twice a month for kind of in-depth conversation, reflection, learning, teaching, guiding, debriefing, that kind of thing. And then we would see them twice a month as a group, in a group setting. One of those is mandatory, one of those is an optional extra. We provide targeted support. And we always say to them, we'll be as flexible as we can be if you need some additional support. We'll do a very tailor-made programme with each individual social worker. We work on that with them. It's a collaborative process, and we'll make sure that they're equipped with the knowledge, hopefully, that we can give them around processes and that kind of thing. If that's not coming through their day-to-day experience kind of in the team because it's so busy, then there's a fallback with us. Kind of the reflective skills to take a step back, slow down, think about what they're doing, what they're learning, think about themselves. We're very conscious of the emotional impact of social work, so we start in those early days to think about how to promote resilience and well-being for the longer term so that they achieve longevity. I never know how to say that word in the role. And I guess some of the learning for us has been that the gradual increase in caseload is really key. We've seen that if we push social workers too early, too soon, too far, that plays out further down the line. So that gradual increase is really important. The system works really well with what we provide. There's always pressures, so we try and work with the management teams, and sometimes we have little conversations about, is that a bit much, or what extra support is needed. So it's I think Emma and I are able to provide that very targeted individual support that's tailor-made. Really doesn't cover everything, but we would like to think that there was an opportunity if they ever got to that point where they could just come to us. Okay, I'll shush now. I'm going to hand over. Do you want me to hand over to, so we have Daisy May Fletcher here and Imogen Wilson. And actually, as chance would have it, they're both in our front door team. But Imogen, are you going to start with some thoughts? Great, thank you.
So I actually started in Wokingham in 2018 as admin for children's social care. So can you hear me okay? And I, since then, so I did the Step Up to Social Work programme. I came into Wokingham doing my placements and then have done ASYE since then. And throughout, I can really say that Wokingham do look after their own. I started in a role where, I wasn't sure what my career was going to be. I didn't know what was going to happen. But, Rachel was so open in talking to me about what their options there are for people within Wokingham, and it's kind of led to where I am now. With the ASYE programme, I would say that it was so valuable. The support that you get straight after that first year as a social worker, being a student or Step Up, you do need that support. Sometimes you feel so overwhelmed, you're constantly learning, you're constantly taking new cases which you may not have experienced as a student, or you may not have kind of known how to approach. And I had Jo actually supporting me, and I knew that I could go to Jo at any point, beyond the sessions that were kind of already booked in. And I'd also say that ASYE is more for community within the team. Like, we have people who did it you know, 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and you can go to them and you can say, oh, how have you done this? Or you kind of have that extra bond, I guess, around the ASYE programme. And, you know, when the next cohort come, you can see we all rally around them and you know, make sure they know that you're there and you've done it and you've had that same experience. So I think the programme itself just brings such a lovely aspect into Wokingham, and it's definitely kept my loyalty to the local authority. You know, I think there are challenges. You know, I can think about caseloads, and I've recently gone part-time, and there are times where I have a full-time caseload because we don't have enough staff, or we have an increase of cases coming through the front door, and they have to be allocated. You know, they have to go to people, and sometimes that means that we do have extra pressures, and as part-time that can feel really difficult. But I also know, even when I'm feeling that pressure as part-time, the full-time workers are feeling it as well, because their caseload is still, you know, up in the higher numbers. So I think that does really play a big part in some of the pressures we feel. But I'd also say, like, some of the other challenges is our time. So we often spend a lot of time going to visits, and when you're based in the office and you're having to park down the road, and it may seem like a really small issue, but when you're spending time parking all the way down the road where it takes you 15-20 minutes to walk there, you're going there, getting in your car, you're driving to your visit, then you're coming back and you're wasting time having to walk to and from everywhere you're going. And actually those, you know, say you go to a visit and come back and you do park down there, that's half an hour of your day where you could be spent calling parents, spending that time with children, actually, you know, completing important documents, keeping your records up to date. And that time, I think, I see as wasted. I think a lot of our colleagues would agree with that. We, as a front door team, work on like a pod system. So every 3 weeks you come in for a whole week, and it's great in that week because you have a pass. Most of the time there's enough passes, sometimes there's not. So sometimes people on duty don't, you know, park more closely. But I find that sometimes I avoid coming in on those weeks because I don't want to have to park all the way down the bottom and then walk up and, you know, waste that time that I could be spent doing more beneficial things with my workday. But yeah, that's kind of everything from me, I think. Daisy, do you want to?
Yeah. So I came straight from university to Wokingham. So this was my first social work post on the ASYE programme, and I just think it was incredibly invaluable. Like, the support that we received over that whole year was second to none. I was initially in the front door MASH team, so I was behind a desk on the phone all day. And then when I went into the assessment team, of course, that was completely new. I didn't even feel like I had a clue what was going on. And my practice consultant would come out with me on those more complex visits, which I think was probably above and beyond the role. She would come out with me and make sure that we were following everything that we needed to do. We would have a debrief after the session, which sometimes we don't always get in the front door with our managers because it is so one after the other. We've got 5 social workers that we need to manage on to the next kind of thing. So the support that I received from Emma was incredible. And I don't know if I would still be in a social work role without that support, because it was really challenging in that first year. It was incredibly overwhelming. I'm glad that I'm still here now. But I can look back and say, yeah, that was tough. And that's why I feel really passionate about our new ASYEs that come through and supporting them in our team and making sure that they know that we are there. And we have been offered to go back to our new ASYE cohorts and do a little session with them ourselves and talk about how we felt when we first began and then what we're seeing now, so that our new ASYEs can feel a little bit more comfortable and it's not just experienced workers that they've got the benefit of. The challenges for me, I think the one big thing, I don't know if it's a personal one for me, but I am a full-time worker, so I'm out every single day with our families, sometimes until 6-7 o'clock at night. And I then can't have my own family or build my own family because of the pay here. Like, it's extortion. Like, the difference between our neighbouring boroughs is huge. And I am here every single day. I'm working with our families. I'm doing my best and putting my all into it. But at the end of the month, I'm still there. Like, I then can't afford to do the things that I want to do, or the things at my downtime, or start my own family because of the significant pay, the difference in pay compared to our local boroughs. But overall, I think the ASYE programme is amazing, and I don't have a bad word to say about it or our practice consultants. And I know that they're still there for us now. They are still there for us now, and the progression's amazing. I'm 2 years in, and I'm doing my PEPS course this year, so I'm going to be a practice educator. I'm at the university next week, and that was all off the back of our practice consultants like encouraging us to do that. And I think 2 years qualified to be able to have that opportunity is huge. So yeah, I'm very excited, and I'm happy to be in Wokingham.
Well, thank you, everybody who's spoken so far. It's been really, really interesting, and we really appreciate it. I think especially Daisy May and Imogen, because you explained your journey so far so clearly, from how you were recruited, your induction, your early training and so forth, and your journey, thus far. And I think that was really, really interesting and very important. I have been making notes, and as members of this committee know, I am prone to suggest that we make recommendations to the executive. I see Prue smiling, and I've already made a note of 2 potential recommendations, one with respect to parking and another one drawing attention to issues relating to pay, because that's what we're here for, is to listen and learn from you. So over to members now for questions. Ian?
Thanks. Try not to put you on the spot here. Apart from the pay, which came through loud and clear, got that one. Is there anything you feel this committee can actually help you do? Is there any question you'd like us to ask us?
This is a good point. It's a very good question. I think for me, it would be, is there more that can be put behind, even things like resources for the families we work with? Could there be, some kind of funding or something? I know it comes back to money, and I know that's really difficult, but one of the things that I think is actually really key now I think about it is we in the front door team make recommendations for our families, and we say these things would really help you to become the family that we really want you to be. To help you give your children everything that we think that you can give to them, but actually the resources, we can go, this would be great, but there's a long waiting list and we can't actually fund this. So I guess it's that, what could be looked at in terms of funding for resources and actually bringing it back to our families, because that's what we do, isn't it? At the end of the day, we care about the families we work with, and we want to prioritise their needs and say, actually, what can we do for them? What's in it for them?
Well, you're on a roll. Could you give us some examples of what those things might be?
I think the main is a mentoring scheme. So we know teenagers in our borough, they don't have much support out there. So if they're not in education, for example, they don't have the support from school or college, and then they don't have anybody. So we're recommending, a mentoring scheme would be great for you to get out there, find activities, meet new people, meet other young people who are in similar situations. There is none in this area that are able, and because some of them are linked to schools, you have to be in the school to be able to access those. That's one of the struggles I'm finding. So I feel like our teenagers in this borough are very forgotten about. And then my other one, I don't know whether we're able to, but family therapies, because we know that is very important, and the waiting lists for CAMS, for example, are out of this world, and our families are really struggling, and then our parents start to struggle, and then where do they go? They keep coming back through the front door, and we can assess and we can assess and we can assess, but we don't know where to
Yeah.
send them, and that doesn't feel fair to them to keep going through us to get the same thing, and then we can't do anything about it. Yeah.
Thanks for asking that, Graham, because they're two really, really practical, examples, which again are likely to be included in a recommendation into the exec. Yes.
Oh, thanks, Andrew. I just wanted to add as well that something you might be able to help us with or take away with kind of, your colleagues and stuff is for our care leavers. So obviously Imogen and Daisy both work in the front door, but, across the whole spectrum, we know that our care leavers had really disrupted experiences in education. Some of them have had undiagnosed learning difficulties or have not had the support that we would give our children. So they're not going to go through the conventional kind of degree, further education route. Some of them do, a small amount of them do, but it would be fantastic to be able to think about apprenticeship opportunities where they can kind of learn those skills on the job. So that would be something that we could really do with some help.
Thank you, Phil.
Thank you. Yeah, good evening, everybody. Sorry to do this to you, but I want to focus in on Imogen, actually. You mentioned something earlier, which I run mental health service in Hampshire, and we have a number of people who join us and train through our service in a similar way, in a way, pathway to yours. But something that you said made my ears prick up, which was about the fact that you'd gone part-time, but you were still managing on occasions a full-time caseload. In the short term, and for pragmatic resolution of problems, that's fine. But for you, do you have a valve that allows you, whether it be through additional supervision or through your supervisor, whatever, to make sure that you feel safe with your practice and that you feel that the people you're looking after are safe too?
Yes, I do feel like I am very fortunate to be in a team where our managers are absolutely incredible. We do have regular supervision, but we also have a lot of informal supervision. So if there is a time when I'm overwhelmed or, need a refocus on my priorities and things like that, then we can have those discussions really easily and really quickly. I'm aware in the longer term teams that maybe that's not there. There is a lot more change in those teams, and there is been difficulties with staffing. So that is going to have an impact on them. And I know from, speaking to colleagues, that is something that has led to colleagues leaving that team because they needed that extra support, or, their caseloads were too high to manage all of that stress. As me as part-time, I think because I've had that support before, it's really easy for me to reach out for more support. I think that has allowed me to build the relationships I need to be able to have those conversations. But on the flip side of that, I will spend many hours after my working day, after I've put my child to bed, doing work to make sure that I feel confident that my families are looked after, or there's appropriate things on the system that means that someone else could step in if a crisis happened, which doesn't always feel great. Yes, we can take that time back, but also I know as part-time it's not always that easy because your days are so valuable when you are here. So yeah, there's different elements to it. There is that support, but also you do get to a point where it is just hard. It is challenging. You don't know if you're going to be going to court. You don't know, what the situation is, and it really depends on the families that you have at that time.
Thank you. Sorry to have drilled down.
No, you're fine. It's fine.
But Joe, I guess that it's you guys that I'm thinking of. You obviously realise the difficulty that you've got with a team of this size, and where you know that you could do with more bodies. And yes, of course, we know numbers are the answers. But is there anything else that can be looked at, whether it be in the form of new programmes, alternatives that are coming along, or initiatives that are coming along, whereby we can maintain? Because I'd want to see if I'm elected in 5 years' time, I want to see Imogen come along and tell me she's still loving this. She may have progressed, and that's great, but she's still loving it, and that she hasn't left or moved to somewhere where the caseload is more fair. So Do you feel that you've got the support you need and the plan in place to be able to manage that problem?
You might need to chip in as well, but I mean, I think the caseloads, the pay, and the parking are three things that are quite key in that, and the having enough social workers. I think the recruitment and retention and the agency percentages are affected by that salary. I think we're starting to see that, and achieving stability in a team is really key. It's very hard as a manager, having had that experience, to manage a team where there's lots of coming and going. That really impacts on children because they're constantly changing workers. I don't know whether there's anything in addition that can add to that. It is those probably age-old things in social work that are difficult to change, really. I think we do all we possibly can, and I think early on in my social work career, probably in the first year, someone said to me, it's not only about learning all the processes and how to do the job, it's learning how you're going to manage it emotionally. So we do come at the ASYE programme with that very much in mind.
I guess where I'm going is for Imogen and Daisy May, what does it take, or what is it going to take money-wise, for us to be able to put us in a position where the reason that people choose where they work is specifically because it's a great place to work, the supervision's great, and supports work is great and everything, and that money is not the issue, because ultimately that's where Wokingham Borough Council will want to be. I know that.
I think if you look at our neighbours, the local boroughs around us, you can see the difference in the salary quite easily. What I would say is we have got quite a lot of workers. Daisy and Imogen are two examples where their loyalty to Wokingham has kept them here, even though that pinch is felt. I know that we have lost a couple of potential newly qualified social workers to local borough in the last 2 years, I think. So, yeah. I don't know whether I'm the best person to ask about that, but I think it's one of those things where, you can see the figures and that's very clear, and we are starting to notice that.
I think Helen would like to add something. And
yes, I just want to first of all thank you all for coming in, and you've done a tremendous job representing the fantastic work that you all do. I just wanted to come in and say we're aware of the salary differential and the salary challenge, and we are reviewing our position, and there will be some recommendations shortly that will be going to the corporate leadership team around this. The car parking issue we know is a key issue and challenge, and again it comes up regularly in our staff fora. And it is unfortunately still a challenge, and we know we need to be looking at that. In terms of caseload, I just want to reassure the committee that overall caseloads are fair and manageable in Wokingham. But I don't doubt what you're saying about peaks and troughs and the monumental challenge. We're dealing with demand on a day-by-day basis, and we don't know what's coming in, particularly in your team. So it can be very, very challenging indeed. But we are responsive to keeping a very close eye on caseload, and I hope that you'd feel able to speak to your managers if you felt overwhelmed at any point. But this is a really difficult, demanding, emotionally demanding job that you do, and your work is really appreciated.
thank you for that, Helen. I think you were going to say something.
I was just going to add on to Phil, is it your question a little bit earlier? I was going to say that I've kept really good relationships with a lot of our admin staff, and one of the biggest things that I've heard from them is that they want to be able to do apprenticeships, but it's just not been available. And actually, I know, a handful, if not more, people within those teams who would jump on that opportunity in a heartbeat. And actually, I think that they would most likely have the same loyalty that I've had, in the sense of coming from admin all the way through, because it is a really great local authority to work for. In my opinion, anyway. I don't know, but you know, the stability that I've felt working here has been great. And, you know, I could have gone anywhere to do my step up, but I chose here. I could have gone anywhere to do ASYE, but the process that I found was easier, you know, and it was what I wanted. It was where I wanted to be. But yeah, I would say that from having those relationships, I can hear from them. You know, there's been people in admin since I started in 2018 who don't have that degree qualification, so have been waiting for an apprenticeship opportunity, and they would snap it up in a heartbeat, and they would be fantastic because of that experience they've already had.
So I think this is at least the second time that the matter of apprenticeships has been raised today. I'm just wondering if anyone is able to provide any more information.
Yes,
thank you.
I could do that, Chair. So we are looking at apprenticeships very, very closely. We are looking at initially offering 4 over 2 years. The DFE are very, very keen on this as well, and we've applied or expressed an interest in some funding towards that as well. So we should have some news very, very shortly. But I think we are committed. Well, no, we are committed to doing this with or without the funding from the DFE, because so that's the key. That's the work.
Sarah?
I just want to say how important it is for our families as well to have that continuity with social workers. And I was just interested as well about the London waiting. I know historically we've had quite a lot of issues with the London waiting with neighbouring boroughs and how that's impacting the workforce remote. Is that still an issue?
I think it is still an issue. I mean, we just don't qualify for it, if I'm right, in Wokingham, and so people do see that difference with that salary uplift from Bracknell and other boroughs. And as we're probably already kind of thinking already, we're so at the victim of our geography in Wokingham, because when people do get itchy feet or feel discontent, look at how many local authorities we border, and that is a real threat for us. But in terms of London waiting, yeah.
Just that I worked in Bracknell before. That's where I came from when I moved here, and so I qualified for in a London waiting, and it's not actually a massive chunk. Just to say, well, what I got there was not a massive chunk. That's not one of the key issues, I don't think.
Okay. Are there any members who've not asked any questions tonight who'd like to? Anne, thank you.
Yes, stupid question, really. It's just, what is the problem with the parking? Is it a shortage of spaces or is it the charging?
So the car park across the street, everyone from Wokingham can park there who works within the council, you know, even if they're, I don't know, just in the office all day, you know, it's kind of first come, first serve, and people get here really early. They're very keen for their jobs. We do have some parking just behind, down in the duck pond, where you have specific passes given to you. So we have 5 in our team, which typically covers a pod, you know, the social workers within a pod duty week. I think my pod has more people, so, you know, we juggle that. But obviously we then have 2 other pods within our team who then, if they want to come in, they're going to park wherever they can find space. And I will say there have been times where I've got parking tickets, even when I've had a pass. So that's enjoyable.
I think the difficulty is, just to add, the difficulty is Imogen described going on a visit and how much time that takes. The issue is it's not just 1 visit a day, it might be 4. So you're in out, and you lose half an hour each time, which is obviously a big chunk a day.
I think we can appreciate, you know, the impact the many impacts that this would have. So thank you for elaborating that. Anybody else? No? Okay. Well, I would like to suggest a number of recommendations. The first recommendation, I'm afraid, is some ways a very mundane one, but it's so important, and it must come first. And that is that the committee thank the social workers in attendance this evening for their participation and its appreciation for the work done by the whole of the social work team. So that, I believe, should be our first recommendation. We usually, unless anybody has any queries or suggestions, as we discuss each recommendation, we usually then end up voting on block at the end, if everybody's happy with that. Yep. Okay. So the second recommendation is that the committee wishes to draw to the attention of the executive the comments that have been aired this evening with regards to the impact that parking has had, on the work and welfare of our social work team. Any comments or suggestions at all? We can tidy up the wording. Neil's very, very good at getting much better wording than I. But are we generally happy with that one?
No, Chair, I absolutely agree. And it is work and welfare. They're two different issues.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you. The third recommendation is that the committee again wishes to draw to the attention of the executive the concerns expressed this evening with regards to matters of remuneration. Okay, it's not just about salaries. It's the whole package, remuneration package. I think we're talking about drawing particular attention, to what have been presented as apparent disparities between this and neighbouring authorities. Are we all in agreement with that third recommendation? The fourth recommendation, and thank you so much, Imogen and Daisy May, for raising this, and Phil, no, I think it was Graham, for your question about specific examples, because that really helped to flesh out the following recommendation, that that the Children's Services team and the executive explore ways of increasing resources available, specific resources available to support families, such as a child mentoring scheme and expanded family therapies. Any comments or questions at all there? Are you happy with that? Got the next one, care leavers. Yeah, we could add that in with that recommendation, okay, further support for care leavers. I was going to suggest, though, that we noted concerns regarding the need for further support for our care leavers. Sorry, Daisy.
Sorry, can we just add exploitation as well? Like a specific exploitation team or worker, I think would be really valuable to our.
Absolutely. Is it?
I'll come back on the point of exploitation. It's part of the Ofsted improvement plan, and I think I suppose I'm just hearing the recommendations and the level of resource that might be required here, and this is challenging at the moment, and some of these recommendations would need to bring into play partner agencies as well. So I think there's something about not just the council here, but the voluntary and community sector, health partners, all of this, because we're in a very challenging economic public sector climate at the moment. Sorry, just being very down to earth about this.
Just to add to what Helen said, it's not that we're unwilling.
No.
It's just how on earth are we going to squeeze this out of the available resources?
Yeah.
But by going and looking at the partnership agenda, I think that's probably better. And as Vicky outlined, the apprenticeships going to the DfE for money for when the opportunity to bid comes up. So yeah, we're not unsympathetic at all. No.
No, and the point is very well taken. And perhaps in that recommendation, we can flesh it out a little bit by exploring ways of increasing resources, including through partnership working, bids for specific projects and so on. Are you happy with that? Yeah. Okay. Any comments, Daisy May or Imogen? No, or anyone else in the team? Thank you. Graham.
Not. Can we use that point? I mean, it's part of normal management to constantly review, and reviewing the partnerships, that's part of process, isn't it? And so I think that we ought to perhaps couch that recommendation taking into account what Helen's just said, that as it is reviewed, it can come to the notice of the Scrutiny Committee. Would that be a fairer approach? I'm asking both of you.
Maybe I've misunderstood. Yeah, I don't know, Prue, do you
You
understand?
mean?
Yeah.
As we are going through things and we're looking at each of those areas, we will bring these recommendations as part of that look. Yes, I mean, yes.
So I'm just feeling to bring it to a level of consciousness rather than
Yes.
subconsciously go through the process.
Yeah, no, I think I understand.
Andrew's up.
Yeah.
No, I think
No.
that's
And sorry, and finally, I would like to suggest that this agenda item be revisited no later than 12 months for today's meeting, so that we do have a formal review, of progress. And I think probably 12 months, or it might be sooner, depending on circumstances. We all happy with that? Okay.
And
No.
Andrew, sorry.
Yeah.
The parking feels like a quick win that would have a big impact, and 12 months feels like a long time to wait for that. Am I missing something?
We can get reports back on individual items at any time. So yes, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Sadly, may I also say that the parking may be more complicated because I don't know about how the funding for it works, or the recharging and so on. And I don't actually know, but I can see, I've got an idea in my head about something we could do, which is to try and have the same number of passes as there are people in the pot. Which might be relatively simple, but might be more complicated. So I'm not going to promise, but we can certainly look at that bit.
And this is really a first step, isn't it? To draw the attention to the executive, to work with the department, to see how we might address some of these issues. Okay, well, if we could please vote on all of those recommendations as one block, and then there's one other point I'd like us to consider noting, and it's about the apprenticeships. Okay, so those in favour, would somebody like to propose, that we accept those recommendations? Phil, okay, second. Jane, thank you very much. All those in favour? Thank you very much. Okay. So those recommendations will go to the executive. I think it was also really, really interesting to hear, Vicky, what you were saying about. I've understood there's a bid in at the moment for a new apprenticeship scheme, and that seemed to be something that was very pleasing to Imogen, and Daisy May, and I'm sure many of your colleagues. So I think we should note that, and the committee would like to be kept in the loop, as that bid progresses. But with that, I would like to formally thank again, all of the social work team who are here tonight, but also please do pass on our sincere thanks, the whole committee's sincere thanks for all the work that you do. It's very, very much appreciated, not only by our committee, but I think all of us as councillors in our casework also understand from our interaction with residents how important and how much appreciated the things that you all do are. So thank you very much, and you are free to go.
Thank you for having us.
Okay, thank you very much, everybody. If we could move back to agenda item 29, the executive member update. Sorry, it's 13 now. Sorry, 13. Okay. Okay, Prue.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, that's really quickly. So there's two things I want to talk about. One of them is this rack material, which I will forget what it stands for. Something concrete. Probably the something won't have a Gillian Keegan word in it, but could. So as far as we know to date, none of our schools have got this material. We have a question mark over one school, and it's not because we suspect they have it, but because they just don't know. They don't have the information, so they've got to have a survey to check. But there's no reason to suppose that they're on any list, because they're not on the list that was released today, which was about 150 odd schools, wasn't it? And everything is being checked. All the maintained schools are having surveys, and all the academies have been written to say your obligation is to do this. And of course, it goes wider than schools as well. So there are also steps being taken to look at other public buildings, some of which are ours, some of which are not ours, right into all our partners, housing associations and so on as well, because there may be housing like it. We're checking our own housing. So it's become a huge issue. But at the moment, we're okay, we think. Yes.
Yes.
You want to?
Yes, yes. I think just to add to what Prue's said, clearly the national issue has been the lack of records, because the rack was used in buildings from the 1950s onwards to the 1990s. Wokingham at that point would have been part of Berkshire County Council. So all records have been reviewed. Our education colleagues have been working very closely with property services. Prue has said we are surveying 26 local authority maintained schools before Friday. We'll be making a formal response to the Department for Education on Friday on the, in terms of the conclusion of those 26 surveys. We have nothing to suggest thus far, and I stress thus far, that there is any rack in any Wokingham school. Okay, Kia.
What about our out of borough schools? I just wondered where our children are placed, whether we have any information on those schools.
That's a very good question. Of the schools that were released today, I didn't recognise any of the names as having anything to do with us. There was a school, Lambourne School in West Berkshire, which I assume it's the Lambourne that's in West Berkshire, because the list that was released didn't have any locations with the school names. So there are quite a lot of schools that had names that could occur more than once in the country. But I didn't recognise anything, and as we go on, we will get more and more information coming back in. But everybody's in the same boat at the moment, looking hard, and we will collect that information.
Andrew, I know you had some questions about this.
Yeah, I mean, the initial question was just about that, which I emailed ahead. In terms of the surveys and the things like that, obviously academies probably have a slightly different system for it, but the maintained ones and the local authorities, is it the local authorities' job to sort of keep records of those surveys and to do those?
I mean, there's very clear guidance from the Department for Education. Our responsibility is for local authority maintained schools. So our property services surveyors are going into those schools and doing visual and very detailed checks. In terms of the position for academies, they have been submitting information back to the Department for Education. And the one school that Prue has referenced, the DFE will be sending a surveyor into that school. Because clearly that is a school, because it's academy, it's linked with the DFE. But as Prue's rightly said, there's nothing there to suggest that there is necessarily RAAC in that building. It was just the way the academy responded. Thank you.
Andrew? No? I have a question, if I may. My understanding is, and and it's based solely on reports in the media, with all the caveats that go along with that. But my understanding is that schools were requested to submit information about the possibility of having RAC some time ago. Do we know if that is correct? Okay, and if so, are we confident that that if such requests were made, that we responded, in a timely manner? And then the related question to that is, there appear also, to be understandable concerns, that there could be other matters such as asbestos, in some of our buildings and so forth. Have we had requests, to ensure that those surveys are done, and have we been responding in a timely manner for our own schools?
Okay, so this is a complicated question because obviously quite a lot of our schools are academies. So what I would say about them is that we did, when it was Berkshire County Council and then when it was Woking Borough Council, obviously they've come from us to the records up to when they departed, we have. And we had condition surveys that we used to do traditionally with schools and so on. So there's a lot of historical information that's available, and we have offered academies help if they need to trace those kind of records and so on. With our own schools, and then to move on to the other point, yes, there were requests for information, and the information, as far as I can gather, has not gone back on block en masse to the DfE, that it's been going in bits and pieces, and not all together. Do you want to?
So I just want to add, and Ming has come on screen as well, and he may wish to elaborate further. So we've had a request that's come in from a minister late, whatever night it was, Monday night, which is a routine request that's gone to all local authorities. And the deadline for response is Friday, and we will have surveyed every single school of the 26 that we need to by Friday. So there will be a comprehensive response from Wokingham. But I think the committee needs to understand, this surfaced in a particular way last Thursday in the national media without any advance warning to ourselves that was going to happen. And schools have literally just gone back, and it is quite disruptive in school time to actually undertake surveys. So we're working in very close collaboration with all of our schools around doing this, but it is absolutely essential that we survey each of the 26 schools, and we're doing that. Ming, I don't know if there's anything more you wish to add.
Yeah, you already covered it all. Just would like to say that, yes, there's a request to what DFE describe as responsible body. Of course, for maintain school responsible body, local authority, as Helen said, we have responded. We are helping carrying out a survey. I want to meet deadline, the final deadline on Friday, to submit all the surveys. It has been an ongoing process, and our property colleague have been working really hard to help school. Although we said we're supporting maintain school, local authority maintain school, we will not turn away academy if they need advice. We give you my name, Pierre's name. Pierre Browning is our school planning and school organization officer. So if they need advice, we will provide. But it's very important. DFE advice they should rely upon, because we just don't want to divert into the wrong direction, because DFE advice is the only correct one. And also DFE themselves responsible for academy school. So our door not shut to academy school, but they need to get advice from DFE.
Thank you for that, Ming. Okay, Prue, would you like to continue?
Thanks. Obviously, if something changes, we will update everybody. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the extraordinary Children's Services meeting that was held in August about the homeschool transport. And just to say that we had the executive meeting, that we had your list of recommendations on a piece of paper, this piece of paper, with our response, which was it's available in the outcome of the executive and in the agenda for it, and you can watch the meeting online, that we have agreed what you wanted. I think we have tried to do everything that you wanted. Improve the wordings where we can. You also had a longer list of things that you kind of asked us to do that weren't recommendations, so actions that you asked, which are like this. I did a detailed response at the meeting. Most of them we can do. Some of them are slightly tricky because it was something like avoiding ambiguity in the wording. Well, we will do our best to avoid ambiguity, but I'm not going to promise that every example of ambiguity is going to be removed. We haven't finalised the absolute final version of the policy yet. We couldn't do it before the exec meeting because the executive had to agree which of your recommendations it was going to sanction, which was all of them more or less exactly as you wanted. And Andrew gave a fine presentation at the meeting. And so the final tweaking is still going on. We've addressed most of them before the meeting took place on the assumption the executive would agree it, but we've got to have it published by the 12th of September, I think it is, so it will be done. Yeah, and there are some other things that we've taken away from the meeting that are not directly related to the wording of the policy, and one of those is making it as seamless as possible for post-16 children with SEND who are not going to be suitable for a personal travel budget to actually not have to go through a complicated process to make sure they continue in a different sort of transport. We recognise that it needs to be frictionless, really, and that's about how we operate that, not about really about what you put in the policy. Yeah.
Ian, and then I don't know, Sarah, if you have any questions or comments.
Just want to come back on something Andrew raised. We covered RAC, but he mentioned asbestos. We didn't cover that. Now you recommend using. It was recommended for many years that you marked it, identified it, marked it, left it alone, but that recommendation's now changed.
Well, so I think we are safe to say we know where all the asbestos is because we have been through that process. And so there may be extra bits of asbestos, but for most schools that is already known. We have an asbestos register and all that kind of stuff. So whether it will, as we don't think we've got any RAC, we won't have to disturb any asbestos, we hope. If we did have some, we would have to disturb some asbestos, and that would be dealt with, yes, in a very complicated manner with all sorts of.
Yeah, my understanding, the recommendation now is changed in that you really need to get it out. So there needs to be something called a programme of work to do it, but on top of RAC.
Perhaps that's a conversation that can be held outside of the meeting. It's a very important point.
Yeah. The point I think I would like to make is that the DfE said they will pay for all this out of their existing capital budgets. So I am a bit concerned about what else won't be funded by their capital budgets that needs to be done. And it probably, at the very least, means far fewer opportunities for schools to have things replaced that actually need replacing. And, you know, it's trying to do, when you haven't had enough money in the system in the first place, trying to do something on top of what you're already not doing is not terribly helpful.
And potentially, worst case scenario, could that even include sort of withdrawing of funding for projects?
Please don't. I'm already having nightmares.
That's fine. Okay, sorry about that. Sarah, going back to homeschool transport.
Just on the RAC as well, I was at a national meeting and there was discussion that some of the surveys haven't been registered correctly as well from the schools, so it's a bit unclear the number of schools that haven't actually responded on that. On the transport, I just wanted, I know we talked a lot about transport being discretionary and parents could apply, particularly for the under fives, or if there was some unique issue that was in the gift of Woking to look at. We are receiving a couple of things from parents at the moment that things are being refused for those ones that is going to panel, and I can give you some broad examples if you would like me to. I don't want to give too much detail because I don't want to identify people, but we are receiving some comments from feedback from families at the moment around that.
Okay, it would be helpful if we did it outside the meeting so that we can get the details. But of course, we're still operating the old policy at the moment. So it'd be interesting to see what that throws up. Thanks.
But rest assured, Sarah, that as the policy is implemented, and of course the schools admission process begins, I think, next week on the 12th, we will be monitoring very, very closely any impacts, that the new policies, might have. So if you could follow that up outside the meeting, that would be grand. Any other questions or comments at all for Prue? No, thank you very much.
The thing I neglected to do is say thank you for having such a thoughtful and long meeting about homeschool transport and your contribution, which I think has improved the policy. So a good example of what overview and scrutiny can do.
Yeah, and without blowing our own trumpet, I would also like to echo what Prue has said. It does show what we can achieve, when we work together, as a committee. And I think it was very helpful for the executive as well, to have such a comprehensive set of recommendations and actions. So thank you very much, everybody. Okay, moving on now. Item 32, performance indicators. I just want to remind everybody that most of these indicators are subject to very careful monitoring by the corporate parenting board as well. So many of the specific questions that you might have are more likely to be directed to and considered by the corporate parenting board. That's not to put a dampener on any potential questions. Okay.
Chair, I wonder if we could ask Mark. Mark Douglas is new to Wokingham Borough Council, started with us in the last few days. So he will be a regular at this committee. So just really for you to meet Mark for the first time. So I think Adam and Mark will be taking us through this in whichever way you deem suitable. Thank you.
Okay, well, if I could just also welcome Mark, okay, to this meeting. What we usually do, okay, because we have all seen the performance indicators and gone through them, prior to this meeting, what we usually do is to work through each dashboard and just see if there are any questions at all from members about each of the dashboards. Is everybody happy with that? Yep. Okay, so there's no need for a formal presentation, from anybody. So dashboard 1. Any questions at all about dashboard 1? Anne, thank you.
Sorry. Under analysis, it says there continue to be challenges with the provider commissioned by Wokingham Borough, and I just wondered what range of services that the provider or providers provide.
I'm just looking at that part now, Moon. I might need to draw on Ming actually in relation
yes, I
to
think
this
Ming
response
is
in
online.
terms of education.
It's referring to occupational therapy assessments. So yeah, I mean, I suppose just to answer your question, unless Ming wants to come on and add some more detail, we're keeping those therapies under review. So that, there's ongoing conversations with health providers around this. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thanks very much.
Thank you. It's really lovely to see that timeliness has gone up to 85%. I think that really does need to be acknowledged on how tricky that is to get to that figure, particularly with all the reports. I just wondered, there was 2 questions actually around quality and whether you feel that some of the work that's been done has improved the quality of the plans. And I also wanted it on the data, because we just get these direction of travel arrows, whether it would actually be useful to understand the sort of the percentage differences and how we're different to our statistical neighbours, and nationally maybe, just because plan numbers don't seem to be going down as such. So whether or not our percentage increase, how that varies compared to other areas.
Who's going to respond to that? Ming, thank you.
Yeah, I can answer the question about the assessment quality and number increase, internal comparison with national average. at the beginning of this year, we have a drop. Performance was not good. So then we work with the health colleague. We identify the driver for improvement, and then we focus our agent psychology service as well in the assessment. So quality improved, and then the rate improved as well. So actually now we are much better than national average, which has been confirmed by DFE. But we do have to also check the quality, and huge resources have been diverted from agent psychology to focus on this piece of work. I can't comment on exactly how therapeutic surveys that have been put in place, but we were told they improved, putting more resource into that as well, after we identify that area need to be improved.
Ming, if I could just probe that a little bit further. I echo what Sarah was saying about it's really good to see the improved timeliness in the EHCPs. And you've outlined in the narrative, some of the reasons for this, the improved joint working of the SEND team with the EP service and so forth. So my question, kind of building on Sarah's point, is, do you feel that this is now starting to become embedded within the system? Or do you feel that it's still potentially quite a fragile area where that progress could potentially be lost?
Yeah, definitely it's more embedded. There's always risk because this is the multi-agency input required. So we need to work closely, continue to work closely with the health colleague. As you know, the assessment process, there are quite a few input from different agencies need to put together. So any agency is delayed, the time list will not be delivered. So at the moment, I'm very confident to answer your question, Chair and Sarah, that become embedded. When I said that, because from April this year, we start monitor very closely every month to see the trend. And the first 3 months when we saw this improvement, we did not celebrate whatever. And then after that, we saw the more embedded that trend seem to continue. So we can comfortably say now it's more embedded, but there are always risk. Any partner, any stakeholder, you're not putting effort, they can drop. But I'm pretty confident we are there now.
Thank you for that, Ming. I've also got a question. It is about dashboard 1, but it appears right at the top of page 48, okay, just above dashboard 2. And right at the top of page 48, there's a reference to predicting growth of future demand for EHCPs and support for an early intervention approach. I'm just wondering whether you could provide to our committee just 1 or 2 examples of what early intervention might involve, including any new approaches or that perhaps haven't been evident in Wokingham before.
Well, it's one of the key strong safety valve work, internal early intervention. I can give an example. Now we have a Senko coordinated work, have a Senko grouping, and we have a much better coordinated Senko work. So make sure the practice, early intervention practice in school is more consistent across the board. And then any school need more support, we put in joint effort with partnership input. And so to make sure the early intervention practice across the school are more consistent. I'm not saying every school is there, but it's definitely more consistent in comparing to what we had in the past. That's one example. Another thing, we're making effort now to make our data more robust, to make sure our data inform our practice, and then we can identify the issue, identify the trend, we're using the server aspect of data, like not just about a request for same assessment, also attendance, exclusion, permanent exclusion, putting together, and then give us a picture whether any school need more support, need to be empowered in order for them to move toward more early intervention model. So less work are taking place. When I was just right, I did not see letter being as sort of systemic sort of approach. Now I can see that most school, again, I can't say every school, most school now work really toward early intervention. And then we have a system now in place to identify the school which may need support, like internal data intelligence is much better now.
Thanks very much for that, Ming. Since the examples that you've given refer to schools, I'm just wondering, I don't want to put you on the spot, Andrew, but I'm just wondering whether you might have any questions at all relating to the examples that, or the areas that Ming has mentioned about Senko support and so forth. Sorry for putting you on the spot there.
Yeah, no, I mean, it sort of relates to something I was thinking in terms of, obviously there's been an increase in the sort of number of VHCPs around it. Do we think that's more down to the fact that maybe more early intervention is happening, or do we think it's down to external factors and things like that?
Sorry, can you please repeat the question, Councillor?
Yeah, sorry, with the increase of the HCPs that we're seeing sort of across it, do we think that's down more because more early intervention is happening, or early early referrals, or do we think it's sort of external factors and other things like that?
Yeah, let's, I think a few factors at the place. Number one, we want school to identify needs as early as possible. If people need assessment, they do need assessment. Another factor is just part of the national trend. The need has been increased. I wouldn't blame everything on pandemic, but in past 2 or 3 years, pandemic and also disruption to education has impact on the need, which you can across country. We see the big increase, which is part of that national trend. So it's not in general external factor, although our early intervention, early identification make the increase happening.
Okay, thanks for that, Ming. Any follow-up question? No, thank you.
I think it's to Sarah possibly. The Ascend Voices have done their survey, and it's interesting to see whether this has had any impact. The timeliness of the HCPs has been noticed by anybody.
I think you have to remember we did our survey at the end of July, so it sort of runs from that academic year. And as it says in the report, I think it was quite low in November. So the bit that we found particularly around the SEND team was it was quite it was either very, very good or it was a very, very poor journey. So it was quite it really was chalk and cheese. So there was that vast variation depending on the journey that parents took. We don't have the information to say whether or not those particular ones were in that dip or not, but private plans or private assessments still waiting time seem to be one of the key drivers to private assessments and things like that for families, because they don't want to wait so long. And it's still really important to the families. And I think that goes back to what Ming was saying, and a little bit to Andrew about where I was saying around the having national data to understand our percentage increase and how we fit nationally is probably a bit more meaningful for the committee to understand in terms of just upward, because I'm not sure plans are going to particularly go down radically in the next few years.
I can actually share. You allow me? It's okay. I can share with national average at the moment. It's at about 50%. So we are considerably better the national average.
Yeah.
While in the past, as you can see, we dropped to level to 39%, 38%. Now, national percentage, every month different, is around 50, 55%, that range. So our 73, 85, not every month same. I think that's considerably higher than national average. We've been informed by DFE to confirm as well. They said we really make huge improvement by having a focused piece of work to find out the driver and to address driver, which I already said. I don't want to repeat it. Yeah. So to answer the question, Sarah, is much better than national average.
Yeah, just on this specific point, for a number of the dashboards, we do include in the narrative information about national averages. If we are able, perhaps we can try to do that for all of the dashboards in future, including dashboard 1.
Sorry, I meant the percentage increase. So we're looking at Q1 last year and Q1 this year, and we've got an increase. And I think that percentage increase, is that the same year on year as our I'm not looking at timeliness, but more around the number of plans and then the rate that they're increasing. Is that in line with national and regional and neighbours? Because I think just saying it's gone up doesn't really give this committee a lot of information to understand on the degree of the issue that Wokingham is facing and how it fits in nationally.
Jonathan?
I've done some recent benchmarking on this, so I can probably speak to it quite accurately. Our rate of increase over the last 3 years has been significantly higher than our statistical neighbours and the national averages. But we were starting from a lower starting point. So if you look at a longer period, our rate of increase over about a 6 or 7 year period is broadly average. But that has been a suppressed rate of growth back, beyond 3 or 4 years ago, with a sudden acceleration just before the pandemic, and particularly driven by the pandemic as well. So we have a system that was probably used to a relatively low rate of demand and has suddenly been struck by a kind of tsunami of demand, which I think we are now playing catch up to address. So it's quite a complex picture, but in terms of the rate of growth, currently it still remains above average.
I think Jonathan's answer sort of adds weight to the recommendation that this be included in the narrative, because it is a complex picture that's not going to be captured by a simple sort of percentage change. But I think we have understood that point. Okay, and if you have further sort of ideas, information to feed into it, please do, Sarah or anybody else. Andrew?
Yeah, I think related to that comment, the only other thing I was going to say is, does the increase sort of take into account population growth and things like that? And actually what we're looking at, if it's an increase, is it sort of a real increase in comparison to the population, or is any of it to do with just maybe an expanding borough at all? And I think related to that is sort of more sort of what we're getting from that information, sort of, because it could be the case that actually that is just in line with what we would expect from an expanding borough, or whether we're seeing a sort of overall increase, which might be.
So more food for thought there, Jonathan. So you have your hand up.
Only if you'd like a response on that. I can say that the rate of increase and the scale of increase is in excess of the population growth. So it's faster than population. It's not purely accountable by population growth, and that's also true nationally. There's been rationally a significant rate of increase over and above population growth locally.
Okay, anything else? Any other questions at all on dashboard 1? Dashboard 2, early help. Sarah?
I like all the figures, and you can see the numbers, and it's amazing how many people are actually being seen, etc. But for me, I didn't get the so what from this, and it's really interesting that so many people are being seen, but I'd really like to understand the impact that's having for our families, because you have some that are repeat going through early help as well. So it's trust to understand the impact and the positive change that's happening as a result of this early help. It would be really useful to understand the numbers.
Adam, are you able to respond to that?
I think that's probably difficult to give a sort of summarising response to, and I wonder whether that's probably more of a question around whether the board wants to hear more from that team, or information around that team in terms of what they do, rather than giving that detail. We often look at early help around supporting families with the lowest level of intervention where possible, to stop needs and matters escalating, or supporting families in the community. And I would say that the service is seen as very successful in terms of that, but that may be a matter in terms, or an area in terms of having a more detailed, because often we've had those questions around what is early help, what does it look like, what's delivered, and this is very much targeted rather than universal services. So these are matters that go through the early help hub, in terms of the potentially come in via the front door and then signposted to our early help hub.
Thank you, Sarah, for raising this question. I'd like to come back to it when we look at the forward programme, because I think Adam's suggestion, that it might be something which we would like to look at in more detail, could be very Could be very helpful indeed.
Early help is an essential part of our offer, and it's covered within the ILAC sort of framework in terms of the early help offer. It's not seen as statutory, but it is essential really in terms of our delivery.
Okay, thank you. Anything else on dashboard 2? Dashboard 3, the front door.
Chair,
sorry, who was that?
It's Adam here. I was just going to give a context. We heard really privileged to hear earlier from Daisy May and Imogen, and obviously this is the area that they work in, and I think it was really useful to have that context of where they work, and in particular line 1 on this, where you can see the number of assessments that team undertakes each quarter, and these are assessments are undertaken on individual children and their full and detailed assessments, but it just gives a context. It was useful having those 2 workers with us in terms of giving a context to some of the numbers we look at in terms of the work that they're undertaking.
Thank you for that, Adam. Sarah?
Sorry, I guess, Adam, that was my point really, is that, you know, they spoke very well around some of the fact that they were doing assessments, but then didn't have anywhere to send them to. And I think that's what I didn't get the sense of from this dashboard, is that it's great that you're having these assessments and everything else, but we're not really understanding the impact of those assessments and where there are gaps or the positive outcomes amongst that. And I think it's really important to have some oversight and context to those figures.
In terms of the outcome breakdown, maybe of the outcomes of those assessments, in terms of whether they progress for allocation and whether they are signposted out or closed.
Okay, so we'll come back and we'll revisit that when we look at the forward programme. Anne?
Thanks. Sorry, I think I might have asked this in a previous meeting, but it's on dashboard item 3. We've finished it.
Yep.
It's just, do you keep a note of the number of contacts? Because obviously you're assessing your contacts to see which to refer. But I just wondered, you know, do you could you indicate what proportion of contacts turn into referrals? Because I don't think we see that.
So we do have that data, and without reading this again, it's often contained in there in terms of we have a contact is where we receive a MARFA information from an agency or a family, and then progress to a referral. So the top one is the number of contacts that progress, so there'll be a higher number that didn't progress in terms of to a full assessment. I'm trying to quickly scan whether it's in the details.
I don't think it is, but just following up on Anne's point, again, in the narrative going forward, you know, it might be useful if it was possible, you know, to include that data. Another question, Anne?
No, that's fine. That would be good.
Thank you
very much.
Anybody else on dashboard 3? No? Dashboard 4, child protection. Dashboard 5, children in care.
Chair, if I just may highlight just something that's obvious in the numbers here, I think it's noteworthy that we've had a reduction of children in care from 137 to 123, which is about a 10% reduction from Q1 to from Q4 last year. What we know when looking at those figures, we had 11 children who actually returned home in a planned basis, which is a very positive outcome in terms of we were mentioning earlier about outcomes of service, and they returned home in a planned way.
Yeah, thank you for that, Adam. Item 5. Any other questions on item 5? Dashboard 6, care leavers. I'd just like to have noted, and I can't actually recall whether it's explicitly mentioned in the narrative here, but there are monthly NEAT meetings where every NEAT is discussed by their PAs and others and so forth. And I've observed one of these meetings and was very, very impressed with the care with which each individual was considered. I have, though, received some feedback informally, and this is mentioned, I think, in the narrative, and it's about support into employment. And I'm just wondering whether there are any things that perhaps we could be doing more of or differently to try to assist some more of the NEAT into employment. The informal feedback that I received, was that, for instance, some of our NEET, for a whole raft of reasons, might be lacking confidence when it comes to search for employment, or interview skills, and so forth. So my question is not so much about the data here, but whether whether the team, feel that this is an area, employability, that could be worth further consideration. Sorry for being so long-winded.
I think, Chair, it's always an area in terms of looking for those opportunities of developing the employment options. We heard earlier, I believe it was Imogen or Daisy May mentioned in terms of the apprenticeship opportunities for our care leavers, and that's something that we're very much looking at in terms of developing further in terms of those opportunities. But also from that number, it must be aware that that number also includes those people that are possibly unable to work for various reasons as well, in terms of the NEET number. So I do think the numbers are not saying that we should be not try and progress or increase, but the numbers are relatively good. But it's always, I completely agree around what we can do further to improve that.
Good. Thanks for that, Adam. I also have a question. Sorry, Marie?
I just have a follow-up on that, because I also have observed one of these monthly NEET meetings, and each worker goes round the young people that they're responsible for. What is very clear is that there are a lot of different factors that affect whether somebody can work. It might be confidence, which is one of the things you've got, anxiety, disengagement, difficult things going on in their lives, which make it very difficult. Some of them are young parents. And that is also a common. There's all sorts of issues, and it's a question of working with them all individually for all raft of all different things. But I'm sure that there's something in trying to ensure that we have the best programs in place, which I'm sure we do. We review it regularly. What will it take? And of course, one or two of them are unfortunately not able to work because they might be incarcerated somewhere, or that kind of thing, or they have other stuff going on, and some of them are never going to be able to work because of disability or difficulties that make it very, very difficult for them to find any sort of employment, or they just will never be able to. So it is a complicated picture.
Yeah, it distracts me, given the sort of the complicated nature, the diverse nature, of reasons, why this is a challenge. Could paradoxically sort of open up opportunities for more partnership working, because there could be opportunities out there with partners who we may already be working with, perhaps we're not always aware of going forward. So, but I did have another question. I believe that the Joint Housing Panel, has been going now for about 12 months. And again, I've had some very informal feedback, very positive feedback about the Joint Housing Panel. And I'd just like some comments at all, about exactly what it is and how it's helping some of our care leavers.
So if I could just come in there, so the Joint Housing Panel, as you say, was set up about a year ago. It's very much working with children's social care and our colleagues in housing, and it's looking at our young people in their various stages of accommodation. So it looks at the portfolio of resources that we have and young people ready to move on, and then also around how we nominate those young people for moving on for tenancy or final accommodation, in terms of leaving a placement and then moving on to their own accommodation and tenancy. And it's very much around that, drawing on that expertise and resources that our housing colleagues have in terms of providing that accommodation.
Any other comments at all about that?
I believe that it's going to be an increasing challenge to find accommodation for care leavers, because of the increasing numbers as we get more and more US children coming out of aging out of the system, and we have a responsibility for them. So it is going to be a challenge, and we are looking at it hard. We've recently agreed the Wellington Road development of affordable housing, which does include some of this type of accommodation, but we are going to have to find more. So it's going to be a stretch, because the prospect of not being able to do it from our own resources, it will be more horrendously expensive if we can't do it ourselves.
It's that, I think, just to add to that, Councillor Ray, it's that the modelling has shown that the significant growth is going to see our care leaver population grow quite significantly. It's gone up 32% this year, and it's that separating the difference between placements or semi-independent accommodation that is funded by the local authority as opposed to tenancies and accommodation where people can move on and live independently. And that's very much what that interface with our housing colleagues looks at as they leave our placements and move into permanent longer term accommodation that is self-funded or funded via other routes rather than the local authority funding that resource.
Thank you. Dashboard number 7, children missing from home care. Any questions? That's actually in 2 parts. It's 7A and 7B, children missing education. Any questions at all? Okay, well, we do need to make a recommendation.
Sorry, Chair.
Sorry,
sorry,
yes?
Chair. That there is a dashboard 8 as well.
I beg your pardon.
And
Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon.
That's okay. Not trying to be pedantic.
Yeah, the children's services workforce.
I just wanted to make the link back to the initial presentation that Vicky Elliott-King did in terms of the top line, where it looks at 12-month rolling turnover. So we discussed earlier the difference between permanence and stability, and that's something very much we're keeping our eye on in terms of that increase from 13% in Q3 to 21% in Q1 of this year in terms of stability of the workforce.
Okay, any questions at all on dashboard 8? Thank you. Okay, so the recommendation for this agenda item is that the Children's Services performance indicators simply be noted. Someone like to propose that? Second? All those in favour? Thank you. Okay. Moving on now. Agenda item 33, the holiday activity and food programme. Is there anybody going to speak to this? Vicky, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's because I shout loudly normally. That's what. Let me just put this on presentation mode. You've had the paper, so I'm not going to dwell on too much of that, but just to say very briefly before I hand over to my fantastic colleague, just a little bit, which is in the paper about what this is about. So it's been in existence for a while, but it's only been rolled out fairly recently to all local authorities. And the main aim is it's about food poverty, essentially, and about equality of opportunity for children and young people during the summer holidays and Christmas and Easter holidays, which is very, very important, known to be very, very important, to make sure that outcomes like school behaviour and equalisation of experience in school is levelled out. So that's what it's about. So it is about mainly for children who are in receipt of free school meals, but we do have the opportunity to use some of the funding for those who are on the edge of free school meals, and that's been particularly important, I think, during this crisis that we're having, cost of living crisis, that there have been families who are really struggling, who wouldn't ordinarily struggle and needed support. And the funding is currently confirmed to the end of 24-25, and we hope it will go further than that. And then you'll see, this is just taken from the paper, but you'll see that we have had a quite significant increase in children in receipt of free school meals. And pleasingly, we're seeing the number of children that are engaging with this programme going up and up and up as well. We have a small team, which is led by Lisa. The grant you'll see there from 1 year period is around about 300,000. And there's a whole set of activities that are offered. It's really a fantastic thing to see. So I will hand over to, it's enough of me, so I'll hand over to Lisa, who, as I say, is absolutely fresh from the very, very intensive, I'll say, summer programme this year, to talk a little bit about what's going well, what's challenging, and what's really next for this programme. Thanks, Lisa. Thank you.
Good evening. Well, I would say the whole programme's gone well, but obviously we're going to just look at some of the highlights, just particularly from 2023 for us. We had the introduction of the booking system, which we used for the first time for the summer this year, which we recognised there was an increase in our numbers because obviously the system was different. So the vouchers went out through from the schools. So more families were accessing the vouchers and then booking on to activities. We have had a huge increase in demand. What we've done is, in order for us to be able to ensure that we have provisions that meet the needs of the children, we use a bit of a mapping exercise. So we look at the current numbers of free school meals in the schools, and then we look at pre-existing providers that work within the schools that offer holiday activities that we can tap into. That then enables us to ensure that children can access activities either at the school they attend or locally, so it's easy access for them. Secondary provisions, we have what we call a main base at the moment, and young people either get themselves there or they're transported in, so we have the additional transport costs for that. We've obviously, with the providers, it just means that by doing the mapping system, we're able to increase providers on a programme by programme basis because we're able to keep up then with the demand. We have just this year taken on 3 new suppliers to enable us to meet that demand. We've also introduced the new the SEND provision, which has been a great success, but it has been a bit of a challenge, which we will talk about in a little while when it comes to our challenges. We also have the SEND Stay in Play session. These have continued even with the SEND provision coming into place that offer families some respite where they're able to drop their children off. The reason we've kept it is because the families want us to keep it. You know, they want to be able to come together, share experiences. We're able to build the relationships up with those families, provide them with some of that wraparound support that they might need, signpost them to support services locally. And in some way, we kind of hope that some of that additional support that we offer prevents some of that access to statutory services. We've had a really positive engagement with young people. We did a big piece of consultation work last year just because our numbers were, we know that young people are hard to engage with anyway, but they were quite low. So we did a bit of consultation with young people to identify how we could attract them to access activities through the school holidays. And from that, we identified that actually they needed more choice, more control over what activities they attended, and that, you know, it needed to provide them with something that they don't have access to on a day-to-day basis. So we introduced things like paddleboarding and you know, maybe a trip to a theme park or tennis, football. There was a whole range of different activities, some with higher costs and some that we could just use resources that we already had to engage those young people. We also have the Master Chef attached to that because we're really, really keen to get young people to look at their own healthy eating and recognise, you know, the nutritional value in food. So they fully get involved in planning, prepping, cooking, the whole sort of element to them keeping healthier. And we hope that they will introduce some of those skills at home as well. The community HAF events have been such a success. I mean, you can see some of the photos just from this summer, in that this really enables us as a local authority. We have many teams from across the local authority that support us to deliver these particular events. We run them across our targeted areas to ensure that they're easily accessible. We have, you know, My Journey. We've got First Days offering school uniforms. We've got the community engagement team. We've got adult learning, sort of doing some taster sessions so we can try and encourage more families to access some of the adult learning courses. and they were amazing. We had over 400 children accessing those events throughout the summer. We've had some really positive feedback about, from families that have benefited from accessing the HAF programme for the first time this year, and what impact that's had on them as a family and for the children as well. We've also been expanding the HAF programme. Don't ask me how this has happened, but we were lucky enough to receive some additional funding to support Ukraine residents moving into Wokingham. So we have an SEND project coordinator that has been doing some sort of one-to-one work with young people or group work, and doing day trips, and it might be around culture, it might be around their health and well-being, it might just be to socialise, meet new friends, and just to share their experiences. We've also led on the Ukraine drop-in. This is now finished because successfully they are now able to integrate more into their communities and building the confidence up to access resources that are already available to them, from coffee shops to community buildings, coffee mornings, and so forth. We have also received some funding through the Tackling Poverty Fund, which I'll talk about in our next steps. And we've also been working really closely with the Short Breaks team, because obviously a lot of our 15% referrals come through from children that have additional needs. So we've been able to fill some of that gap that's missing. In terms of challenges, there was a delay with the booking system, which left us about 4 weeks behind in terms of making sure that the messages were relayed out to schools, and also to get families booking onto provisions, and us being able to have a closing date to enable us the additional time to get things like transport in place, and understanding what staffing resources we need. Obviously, children with additional needs, some of them require 2-to-1s, 1-to-1s, and so forth. So that was a bit of a challenge, but we got there. We got there in the end, and we've had one of the things we're really proud of is the booking system provider came back to us and said that they've had the biggest uptake in terms of families actually using their vouchers across sort of nationally, in terms of some of the providers that their local authorities that they're working with. Obviously, like with anybody, our costs have increased, which means that our funding is having to stretch a lot further. But I think we're just about managing to cover that at the moment. My concern is if the demand increases, it's about how that's going to look moving forward. Demand for SEND provisions is a real challenge for us. You're probably aware that obviously there are a lot of families in Wokingham. When we say SEND, this is not just children with special educational needs. This is also children experiencing social anxieties, mental health, and sort of preventing them really from being able to get out into their communities and access provisions that can meet their needs. So we are working towards achieving that. We've set up the SEND provision. Unfortunately, we haven't been able to get it Ofsted registered in time, so we have had to ensure that we're only able to support children from 8 to 13, but our next step is to obviously look at getting that Ofsted registered. Again, the increased costs of activities and food provisions as well. Just by having the booking system, what we've recognised is more people booked on, but we had more no-shows. And because of the providers that we work with, they have a cancellation policy, and if the parents don't cancel within the timeframes of that cancellation policy, we are still required to pay for those places. So we have recognised that. We are, after every programme, we evaluate, we look at, what's worked, what hasn't worked, how can we improve it, how can we work with providers, how can we work with the booking system provider, and improve how and the way we work. And then it's the next steps. So obviously it's we have secured some funding through the Tackling Poverty Fund, because one of the biggest issues we have is obviously children with additional needs or with anxieties or social anxieties really struggle to access something that they've never had they've never had access to. So we recognise that actually what we need to do is to build those relationships with them and to enable them to transition into the HAF programme. So we've got some funding that we can deliver some after school provisions. We successfully had a pilot that we ran from Easter through to July, which was an amazing success. Just for instance, one young person that I can think of wouldn't even have any conversation, any eye contact, wouldn't engage with any of us whatsoever. Our SEND project coordinator that has the experience and the wealth of knowledge of knowing how to work with young people and to give them that time to build the relationship up. It took 8 weeks, but within that 8 weeks, we were able to get that young person through the door and staying for a whole session for an hour and a half. Wouldn't engage with another child, but finally by the end of that session engaged with me. That was a huge breakthrough for that child, who then accessed 2 sessions through the holiday activities and food programme. And that's where we've recognised we actually need to do a little bit more work there. So with this funding, this will enable us to work in our targeted areas, deliver the after school provision and support some of those children to then integrate into the HAF programme through the school holidays. Obviously next steps is to register with Ofsted so that we can now start supporting children from 4 to 8 years that have additional needs. What that will do is enable us to look at where the demand will be as well and what kind of costs we're going to look at, just because obviously, as you can understand, SEND provisions have a greater cost to our mainstream. And what we want to try and do, where possible, if they can access mainstream, we will support them to access mainstream. But we recognise this doesn't, it doesn't work for everybody, and we want to be able to provide them with a safe, secure environment that they can happily access through the school holidays. In order for us to do this, we obviously need to look at additional funding because those SEND provisions do cost more. We need staff that know what they're doing. We need venues that are suitable to be able to support children with more complex needs. For instance, we delivered the SEND provision at All Saints School, which was great. We had the space, it was safe, secure. But actually, in terms of knowing how many children we would be able to safely have at one provision, we probably will need to think about having a second base somewhere else that we could offer a second SEND provision. And then also, because of the success of the engagement with secondary aged young people, we are now looking at setting up a second base over in Woodley, obviously with our mapping and looking at where we have more young people accessing free school meals. Woodley is an area that we consider to be the best option for us to look for a second base in order for us to deliver provisions over in that particular area. And hopefully it will then reduce our transporting costs because we're not having to do so much transportation around the borough.
Thank you.
And I think that's it. I think I've remembered it. It's been a long summer, so I do apologise if I've forgotten anything.
I think just to finish up very briefly, I think this programme, what's interesting about it, I think what we should point out is that there are. Yeah, sorry. Thank you.
Doing a nice job.
The thing about this programme is that there are offshoots, I think, or things that we're uncovering which are outside of the original remit of the programme, particularly for children with SEND. I mean, I've heard stories. You hear stories about families who are absolutely struggling over the summer to entertain their children, to find something which is going to give them respite really over the summer. I mean, really desperate families and families who say they're not sleeping, they're not eating, they just can't cope. And it's uncovering a need, isn't it? Really, I think that needs to be addressed, and this is one way of doing it. So it's been quite heartwarming, but upsetting at the same time to see that happening. But I think that's what a programme like this will uncover, those gaps that we just don't know about, and also to say that I think there is a lot of synergy between this programme and our early help, or early help in general. a lot of what this is doing is preventative. So, you know, we will be looking at ways of understanding that better. It's a bit like Sarah was saying about so what, you know, what's the outcome of this, understanding that and understanding how that fits with the overall prevention agenda. Thank you.
Sarah.
No, I mean, I love the HAF programme, and it's really nice that, you know, Send is included in that. I know how hard you've worked to put that in. And that story around that young person and taking 8 weeks, the impact that that's going to have to their overall mental health projection is going to be untold, and you won't necessarily see the final outcomes and the significance of that and how important it is for these families to have respite. So I was really pleased to see that you're working with short breaks as well, because our families talk about provision over summer and after school clubs. They're just not accessible to our SEN cohort, and it's really nice to see that you're really working towards those. I did have one question though around some of the activities you do. How inclusive are those? So you've got some specialist ones for those that can't access it, but how inclusive are the other programmes that you're actually run, the paddleboarding, and, you know, what sort of level of need are you able to cater to?
So we have had children. Oh, sorry. We have had children with additional needs accessing some of those activities. Obviously, we link in with the parents, obviously, first and foremost, to identify what the level of need that child or young person has, and whether they're going to need a one-to-one, whether they have a medical need. So, you know, already this year we've been able to provide some support for a child that has quite complex diabetes. We've managed to get their NHS nurse in, deliver training to all of the staff so that we're able to support that young person. So they were successfully able to access some of the secondary provisions this summer. We also have another child that has epilepsy and requires buckle, I believe. I want to get that right. But again, we linked in with the NHS, and they've come in and delivered the staff with the training to enable them to access that provision. So what we do it on a case-by-case basis. And I think that's just because, number one, it's, you know, do they have a physical need, a medical need, or a learning disability, and then we look at what support we can put in place. So it's very, very individualised. One of the things I will say, we really try to link in with the schools where possible to get copies of EHCs, speak to the SENCOs, understand the child's needs a little bit more. If there's something that the school can't help us with, then obviously we look internally and speak to, you know, the disabled children's team or short breaks team that might have a bit more information about that child or young person, just to ensure that we're able to offer them the right support.
Richard?
Can I ask 2 quick practical questions? So is the HAF grant a flat rate, or will it go up because you've done more this summer? And then secondly, are the 1,200 children, young people, I'd be interested in how many sessions they came to. So how many came to one session, how many came to 20?
Yeah. So I can give you those answers. Just remind me. Oh, so the funding. So each year, when we get an increase, we will get allocated an increase in funding, but that doesn't necessarily mean to say that it will cover what the free school meal data is going to be for that year. So although we can recognise an increase for this year, we'll get our funding allocated this year for next year, but actually what we might find is that we still have an increase of children accessing free school meals, and it doesn't cover that. So we have to obviously cover that shortfall. In terms of the booking system, what that allows us to do is draw the data out, and it can tell us exactly what activities they've booked onto, if they've attended those activities, and if they're a no-show, or whether the parent has cancelled. So we can identify all of those factors.
And you don't know yet for the summer, do you?
We don't know just yet.
Yeah, no, just
Literally, we are literally going through the data this week. So so we're just going through that. I mean, we're happy to share that information with you once we've got that ourselves.
Yeah, if we could perhaps request that information be sent to all members of the committee as soon as it's available, I think that would be really, really interesting. Are there any other questions on this item? Andrew?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, are the activities and things just available to those on free school meals, or are there options for those who aren't, say, friends of these people to sort of pay-in options and things like that? Because I'm just thinking of the harder to reach young people, and I'm thinking especially the younger secondary people. It might be that they want to go along with their friend who doesn't receive school meals, and is there that option for them to do stuff like that together with one of them paying but them not, but without it sort of being an obvious thing, I guess?
Yeah, so with our primary provision, absolutely. We use a lot of commercial suppliers. So we've had that, we've had whereby child A is a parent that's working and child B is a parent that accesses the free school meal, and they will link in and make sure that they're going on the same days as one another. In terms of secondary provisions, that's something that we're still trying to work on. Obviously, we are trying to look at how we can be a service whereby we can take payment, but that's a little bit more challenging. So at the moment with our secondary provisions, we plan all the activities, we do all the background work, and then we have a organisation that comes in and provides the staffing that have experience and background around working with young people. So we use a local provider to do that. In terms of our SEND provisions, again, that's something that we want to do. We want to look at how we can work more closely with short breaks, and potentially, for families that are really struggling to use their personal budgets, to buy into the service, to buy into the fact that they could come along to, provisions that meets the needs of their child and provides them with respite at the same time. So that is our future aspirations, but it takes time to put in place.
Graham.
Yeah, just a small thing. Well, it's not a small thing really. Camp Mohawk, for example, is in my ward, and I've been called up there, and many of the other residents around the area to help them with fundraising, and of course they're always desperate for funding. And there's a relationship building here with the likes of Camp Mohawk, who can provide valuable service, who are actually very vulnerable financially. So actually having a sustainable offer in the longer term is challenging.
We worked with Camp Mohawk, so we had a full day at Camp Mohawk with our SEND families. So again, we hired out the whole venue for the whole day. They provided us with members of staff, and they had a jam-packed day there with swimming and using the sensory rooms and so forth.
I was picking on Camp Mohawk because it was someone that I could quote as an example, but they'll not be the only example of organisations that we're partnering with, and we ought to make ourselves aware of who actually could be helped in other ways, so that we can carry on providing this valuable support.
Yes, it's this issue of partnership working again and the opportunities that brings, isn't it, that we've discussed a number of times tonight. And it's where we can do this, of course, it's a win-win situation, isn't it? So point very well taken, Graham. Sarah?
Sorry, just one point on the short breaks and Camp Mohawk. So the way things have been commissioned and the way the funding for the short break and respite care has actually changed a lot. So you're almost talking about a model that we previously used to have, that it's changed into personal budgets and accessing those things. So I think we need to, and I know that there is the short breaks steering committee that hasn't met yet, looking at those gaps and how that can, those resources. So there is a mechanism for those things to be looked at, hopefully.
I think the correction by assumptions is the very reason why we ought to be made aware, because clearly I'm not up to date.
Right.
You need to take place. I'm getting tired.
Right. Well, I'd like to firstly thank Vicky and Lisa for very, very clear and informative, presentations and answers to questions and so forth. And my goodness, so much has been achieved since 2021, and it's so exciting, thinking of the opportunities going ahead. I particularly appreciated Sarah's question about inclusion and the responses, to that, and the examples that you gave, real world examples, of how, this is being treated rightly, very, very seriously indeed. So we are asked to make some recommendations on this agenda item. And the first recommendation, these are set out on page 57 in the agenda pack. The first recommendation is that the committee notes the purpose of the DFE holiday activities and food programme, the local delivery strategy and the programme take up to date. And the second recommendation, that the committee notes future plans to expand the programme's reach and impact, synergy and links with other work in the council. Would somebody like to propose that we accept those recommendations? Graham, and seconder Andrew. Thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. I've got a little bit out of order because I was also going to make a request, okay, that going forward, I think it would be really appreciated by councillors and really informative for councillors, if we could be made aware, of when some of the HAF activities are taking place, so that we might be able to observe, at first hand and learn, in the process. So if that could perhaps just be noted as well.
Absolutely. I should say also that featured on Radio Berkshire.
Sorry.
We were featured on Radio Berkshire as well. The HAF programme was highlighted. And one of the councillors, I can't remember who it was now, just to talk. It's very brief. It was like a minute or so, but it was very nice to have it acknowledged.
Good.
Yeah.
I would say send you videos.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Vicky and Lisa. Agenda item 34, homeschool transport training for drivers and assistants. Do we have anyone speaking to this item? Oh, hello, Rebecca.
Hello. Yes. Yeah, I'll speak to this item. I haven't prepared your presentation because you asked for some reports, so you've hopefully got the report in the agenda. The committee is requested to note the driver training and escort training that currently takes place, and then make any suggestions for further training which should be provided, but bearing in mind that they must meet the council's legal duties, be a reasonable and proportionate request, and not currently be in the training programme. So just briefly outline that guidance and to local authorities is that we need to decide what travel arrangements that we need to make, ensure that they are suitable for the needs of the child, employ appropriate transport companies to deliver that transport, and ensure that staff have a reasonable level of training. When it comes to what training is actually required, the council needs to decide how best to deliver it and what training needs to be delivered, and that can be in any form. It can be informal training, such as within the operator's premises, up to formal courses, as well as taking advice and guidance from parents on any specific strategies to an individual child's case. So in terms of what WBC deliver, we do require all operators to be vetted and checked, as we do their staff, and we require before any operator or their staff can work on a contract, some basic training within the operator's premises, which are things like first aid, familiarisation with company policies, plans, procedures. So that's what to do in an emergency, what would happen if an accident's there, how to report things, all those types of things, route familiarisation, data protection, and general training around the role. Where we tighten up and insist on seeing more formal training qualifications and certificates is particularly around safeguarding. As an authority, we do insist on all staff having attended a face-to-face safeguarding course, which I know isn't the case at all authorities. Many do online. We then insist on some evidence of pupil management techniques, challenging behaviours, autism and epilepsy awareness. Depending on the children being transported, we can, or we do look for on certain contracts, assistance training in the assistance of passengers, particularly those with wheelchairs. If they are carrying wheelchairs, then there must have been training in terms of putting the wheelchair in, how to secure the wheelchairs, and also harnesses are commonly used within vehicles, so there's specific harness training as well. and beyond that, they're the main ones we require, but obviously each child is individual and it depends what we get through from the SEND team in terms of the individual child's needs and also from the schools and the families. And we have to be reasonable and proportionate in terms of the training offered or requested of the staff in that sense. It may be that if you have such as rescue medicine or a medical need, then that would be where you work with partners and have training delivered from other organisations. As WBC, we do have a in-house course which we commission, which covered the key areas, and that's delivered by Redibus, and we run that fairly regularly. We also bring in someone a couple of times a year to deliver wheelchair training side of things and the harness training. And we're currently talking with one of our schools about having, I think it's a deputy head of a specialist school, come in to talk more about the behaviour management techniques. So that's a broad outline of where we are at the minute. Is it best to open it up for questions?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rebecca, and both for your the presentation and the written report. I found both really, really helpful, and very, very clear. Are there any questions at all? Anne?
Yes, I've got two. One question is for the training that takes place at the operators, such as safeguarding training and health and safety at work and so on. Is that done to a particular standard?
Health and safety at work, that's, well, if I take it back a step, before any operator is allowed to work on a WBC contract, they have to be registered on our procurement system. To be registered on our procurement system, they have to have provided a whole vast range of policies which are all assessed and to a certain level. And within those policies and those plans and those procedures, they will set out their training practices and how they administer it and what they cover. Safeguarding, because it's so important, we insist that we have a face-to-face safeguarding course, which actually we run. So the operator will do some basic safeguarding training, I'm sure, and they should do, but we're actually double checking that and we insist that it's done here. They also have a legal duty in terms of manual handling, and that would be on the operator, but that is checked through the policies as well, that they are doing that.
All right, okay, so it's sort of through the...
we don't ask for a certificate, for example, from manual handling, but we have certificates from our courses.
Oh, right, okay, thank you. So yes, it's handled through the procurement process. My other question was, actually I've got two, sorry. It says something like, in cases where rescue medicine is required, suitable training is sought for the administration of the rescue medicine. Is that sort of in an emergency situation?
Yes, we wouldn't administer a medication on board necessarily, because in an emergency what we instruct drivers to do and personal assistants is to pull over, and then they're expected to call for 999. But when we say rescue medicine, there will be some certain conditions or medical conditions where you need to have medication within a certain period of time. We're talking life and death situations. So that would be classed as your rescue medicine, and you would need someone trained to administer that medicine.
What, so they'd have to be on the transport?
Yes, trained. They would be there as a personal assistant and skilled to be able to administer that medicine. That's where you would bring the healthcare sector in to deliver that training, or you would source a PA from the healthcare sector to come and accompany it. Just to give you one example, we did have someone who did actually travel with oxygen tanks, and that was a health PA rather than an operator PA who was sourced separately, because it was a specific need.
All right, so
a certain medical condition, if you see what I mean.
Yes, so usually there'd be a personal assistant who would be the one who'd be trained to do that particular thing?
Yeah, because you wouldn't.
I was just wondering if the driver might need all sorts of emergency skills, but it's not like that.
The personal assistance coming.
Right. Okay, thank you. And then just the other thing is there a clear way for parents to get in touch with Woking Borough Council if they have concerns about the travel?
If they have concerns, we ask them to raise them with either the corporate transport unit or the SEND team or the operator as soon as possible. And a lot of parents do raise those concerns, but unfortunately some parents don't, and we don't find out about them until months later, or they just don't raise them at all. But we have, you can bring the council offices on the general number and they'll be put through to the appropriate team, or we have a specific inbox with an email address which goes out on all our correspondence as well. But I know that some SEND families do say they find it difficult to get in contact with us. So yeah, we can look at other ways. But yeah, there are specific routes if they want to. Before transport commences, what the operators will be doing is they will be ringing the families who children they will be transporting, and they'll have a conversation with the families about the timings that they'll be, the pickup timings, the drop-off timings, for example, and that's the point at which they have the conversation. Is there anything that we need to know about the child that we'll be transporting? Some children would suffer from, say, anxiety or conditions, and they will have specific strategies to them that will help calm them on the transport. So that's where we really need the advice of the parent, because they will know best how to calm their child if they were to become distressed.
All right, okay, thank you. So are the parents given any, just like a little leaflet with information about transport? Would that not make sense really? Because there's, they don't need, there's nothing general that they could be given. I was just thinking if you had a little leaflet, you could have a contact number on it. If you needed then to, because otherwise you're saying they need to get in touch with the general switchboard at Woking Borough, and there are a few families that don't do that sort of thing.
Well, it would be which number do you put on the leaflet, because the team don't have an individualised number. It is the council's number, and then they'll come through to the CTU team. And the reason for that is if you have one number, you've got to have one person manning that one number. And you don't want to wait for one member of staff if they're on leave for a period. Whereas if you come through to the switchboard, what happens is it goes through to the first member of staff. If they're on the phone, it'll go through to the next one, and all the team are trained to be able to answer those calls and take those calls.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks for those questions, Anne. Okay, Sarah?
Hi, Rebecca. I've got a couple of questions. Can I ask whether the safeguarding covers professional boundaries? Because that's these children are very vulnerable, and it can be quite easy for professional boundaries to be stepped over, often unintentionally, but that's really important for safeguarding our children. It's really nice to hear that you're looking at behavioural management techniques for some of the drivers. And is it for drivers and the assistants? And is this going to be a standard thing that you're going to be introducing from now on? And when will that start?
Should I take the first one first? That's probably in terms of safeguarding. Yes, it does cover professional boundaries. It covers everything from what is safeguarding, what does it mean, what are the indicators, what might happen, what's good practice, the professional boundaries, the reporting, the recording, all those types of things. So yes, it certainly does cover professional boundaries as you'd expect in any standard safeguarding course. Sorry, I've forgotten the second. Oh, the behaviour management, wasn't it? In terms of behaviour management, there is an element of that already built into our standard course, but some of the feedback I think we've seen is that maybe we need to do a bit more, certainly from the school's perspective. So we haven't secured a date yet. We're still having the conversation with the particular school that's offered the resource to help us, but we would like to do that as soon as possible. But it will be down to the availability of the school to let that resource go to come and join our course, because the way we run them is to try and get everything in one place to make it as easy as possible for operator staff to attend. Otherwise, if you've got 3 courses that you're running and say, well, you need to be on this one at this time, that one at that time, that one at that time, and you find that the attendance levels aren't as good. Whereas if you can say, right, we've got a day's course, and then we bring in the specialist people to deliver that training, we find that's much more effective and works better. So short answer is we don't have a date yet. I can certainly let you know when we do, but as soon as possible, as soon as we can arrange that with the school.
Sarah? Good. Thank you. Richard?
Can I ask 2 questions? One is, how often do the people that are doing the transportation have to repeat the course? So how long is it valid for?
Every 3 years is the maximum that they can. So if you do it every 3 years. If they want to do it earlier than that, they can do. Or if we identify a problem that we think retraining would help mitigate, then we would request that that particular member of staff retakes the course. And it is a course that you have to pass in to some extent. You have to show participation and understanding to be able to get the certificate and the badge to say you've done it. Because if you can't just turn up and not participate, because then we don't know that you've actually taken in everything that you're being told and be able to apply it.
I think most of us repeat safeguarding courses every year, certainly in educational context, but that may not be practical in this area. The other thing I was struck by was how kind of soft the conversation between the driver and escort and the parents is, because if the parents don't know, that it's impossible to measure whether those conversations are happening, because the parents don't necessarily know that this is their opportunity to tell the taxi driver what they need to know. So I was wondering whether there's a way of making that more kind of official in some way. So if it could be in writing, say, I don't know the detail, but could there be a situation in which the parents submit 3 paragraphs about their child and the taxi driver signs to say they've read and understood it? Because I don't think parents would necessarily know. This is their one chance to say, this is how to support and encourage and protect my particular child. So it just feels very informal and relaxed, and I think it could be tighter.
Okay. Could I get Sarah's view on that as to whether that would be too much of a burden for a SEND family, or whether that is a viable idea?
Well, they've already provided some of that information, haven't they, when they fill in their application form? So some of that information is there. But I mean, some of the very basic things that we might hear is I don't know, some assistant might not even help a child carry, a swimming bag. They've got lots of bags and they just knock on the door and walk away, and the escorts aren't actually helping them from the door to the taxi, for example. So it's those sorts of things, I think, and they can be quite grey areas that, some parents will expect that and some parents won't, and some children will need that and some won't. So it is really important that there are some opportunity for the families to actually feed back and say, well, this is what we need. And I think early warning of changes of taxis are really important to families, and being able to meet them. And I think it really sets the school year up well. There's a lot of information around, how if you start the first week, you're not going to be persistently absent and that sort of thing, and how being ready for school is so important. But early introductions to those drivers and assistants make a massive difference to families.
So that wouldn't necessarily be more paperwork as such.
It is. I think there's a whole section on it, Rebecca, in the SEND survey. So I'm not going to second guess what Terry will have memorised, because she's.
I have read the survey.
But more than happy to meet with you and go through the feedback in that. Maybe that would be a really good, and to have a look at that as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for those questions, Richard. Does anybody else have any other questions? Okay. I did note in the report that there's a reference to incident reports. I think it might be useful if some data could be circulated outside the meeting, about the incident reports, just to see, whether this is a matter that needs any further exploration. I would like to, the recommendations say that we note the driver and escort training that's currently provided for those delivering homeschool transport services. I think that's a fairly straightforward thing to note. But are there any other recommendations with regards to training within the parameters outlined on page 62? We've had the discussion just a moment ago, about providing more information from parents to drivers and escorts. I think rather than making that a recommendation, we will note that Sarah and Rebecca will agree to meet and to discuss that further. Yeah. Are there any other recommendations though on this item? No. Richard?
I think there's a communication job as well. So I don't think it's clear to parents necessarily what training people have had. So I think it would change the relationship a little bit if they were aware of the day's training people have done, because as a parent whose child has had the benefit of this transport, I think it wasn't clear, speaking personally to me, of the training they'd gone through. I thought there were basically taxi drivers turning up, earning extra money at a quiet period, which I realised after a time it wasn't that. But I think to start with, I thought I wasn't aware how much training and background there was to this. It would be helpful to make that clearer to parents, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Richard. And I'm wondering whether some little explanation, written explanation could be provided, perhaps on a, A5 card or something. Just it's going back to Anne's point, isn't it? About what sort of training, has been provided. It would be reassuring, wouldn't it? To the parents. I don't know. Is there some sort of information pack that goes out to parents? Yeah.
Obviously, we're introducing a new homeschool transport policy, and there'll be a whole raft of guidance and stuff written about that and advice. So I'm sure that as in the process of preparing all that, we can take some of these points in and see what we can make of them. But we have, I think, as part of the process already acknowledged that we need to be clear about the link between school admissions and school transport, for example, which is another point where people get lost slightly in the system and don't understand the ramifications. So there's the scope for, because we're writing things again, to clarify some stuff that I think people do find confusing. However clear it looks from one end, it doesn't necessarily look clear from the other end.
I'm really reassured and encouraged having read this, but I didn't know before.
And just add, we took away an action from the last meeting around the transport policy that we were going to work with Rebecca around the wording of the letters to help that clarity, and we've already got that as an action.
Good. Well, with that information, I don't think we need and what Prue has just said, I don't think we need, specific recommendation, on this. Okay. Right. Okay. So we do have the one recommendation which I read out earlier, is simply to note this and to thank Rebecca and her team, for all that they're doing. Can we have a proposer? Graham, and seconder. All those, Andrew, all those in favour. Thank you very much indeed. And thank you very much again, Rebecca, for your input tonight. Absolutely. If you weren't going to, I was going to. Okay, if we could resume agenda item 35, the post-Ofsted plan. Helen?
Thank you, Chair. Colleagues, in the 20th of June meeting, we talked in detail about the ILACS inspection that we had from Ofsted in March. We said in that meeting that we were undertaking an improvement plan that we would share with Ofsted in August. We did that. We had a positive response from the lead inspector to the Ofsted improvement plan that we'd submitted. Unfortunately, the lead inspector went on leave and isn't back for a few weeks. So we will be arranging to meet with the lead inspector to have a discussion about the content of the improvement plan, likely to be in early October. At the last meeting, we agreed that we would review the improvement plan in this meeting, and you have a copy of it, and we would do a further review in January. And just to assure the committee that we have an improvement board, it meets monthly. The improvement plan is a dynamic document. It is being scrutinised and challenged and will be added to. Or, you know, as we complete items, we will be removing them from the improvement plan. So just to assure you that this is, a very dynamic document that we are taking very seriously indeed. So happy to take any questions that the committee may have. Thank you.
Okay, any questions? Phil?
Right, it's only a minor point, actually. I didn't have a question until virtually your last sentence. You said that with regards to the improvement plan, which I've read quite thoroughly and I really like, you said that as things are completed, they will be removed. Can I ask perhaps that doesn't happen? Can I ask perhaps that you could maybe follow them as completed rather than remove them? In a way which helps us to understand what's been done and what's to be done.
My suggestion is that they get put at the end, so they're not clogging up the whole plan, but you can still see that they happened.
But even if you could just shade them in maybe green or something, that would be fantastic. Thank you very much.
Yeah, really good point, Phil. Okay, and that seems to be a very sort of acceptable sort of approach. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. Richard?
I don't entirely understand all the acronyms, so could I just ask, is there a particular area of this that we're concerned about? Or are we making good progress in all 5 areas?
I mean, we're taking all 5 areas very seriously. We need to improve in all of those areas. We in the improvement board meetings, we look at the areas that need particular focus where there may be blocks or barriers, because we've absolutely got to make progress. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. We've got Adam online also. I don't know if Adam wants to come in and add anything to that. Thank you.
I think it's important to note that some of these areas aren't solely sit within children's services, they're broader than that. So there is some of that bit about the system and those changes wider across the system that we're navigating and influencing that change in. But of course, this is, before Ofsted arrived, we had an improvement activity and plan. So it's not a novel area that we're doing in terms of working this way, in terms of having a focused plan. We have them when we do specific audits or outcomes across the piece. But this one specifically focuses on the areas that were raised during that inspection process.
Thank you, Prue.
Just to add one thing, when we had the social workers here, one of the things they raised was exploitation, and there's a specific section on exploitation in the plan which you will have read, which includes an objective to get a specialist exploitation post.
Yeah.
So that kind of is I'm not going to say it's in hand. It's good. We have to find the money, but that is the aim. So we are addressing that specific concern.
Thank you for that, Prue. If there are no more questions or comments, again, I'd just like to echo what I think has been expressed here by other members tonight. Support for this plan. I personally found it, believe it to, have a very clear and comprehensive structure. I like the structure. I've also noted, for instance, on page 77, that there are some indications, of early indications that changes, are being achieved. On page 77, for example, there's assessment completions are beginning to improve in terms of performance. So I like the structure, I like the reporting methods, and as Helen said, the intention is that this will be brought back to the committee in the January meeting. Helen?
Yes, I'm just aware we've got Mark Gammon online, and Mark has been instrumental in the structure of the plan. So we'd really like to acknowledge the work that Mark's done in that regard.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you, Mark.
Thank you. Cheers.
Good.
Yes, if you wouldn't mind, in a slight moment of non-seriousness, I actually would like to thank Mark for being so alert at this point in the meeting, having waited so much. And then only to have one line to say. So, but it is appreciated all the same. It is appreciated all the same, and I think you should know that.
Yeah, he didn't hesitate at all getting involved, did he? When called. But so yes, we just have Anne.
Sorry. Trying to think what I have been meaning to ask. And in terms of the exploitation, I'm not sure if I was clear from what's said, how any such children are identified. Under progress summary, there's going to be an external auditor. And I just wondered what materials will the external auditor be able to see?
Who's best placed to answer that question?
Sorry, Adam, are you coming in?
I was just trying to maybe if you could just rephrase the question or repeat the question. Is it in relation to what would the auditor be looking at when they're auditing?
Oh, well, it was really, I suppose it was sort of, it was, what were the auditor be able to look at? But also I didn't feel clear how any such children would be identified. It's talking about those children, it sounds as if it's talking about children who have been identified, but presumably.
So generally those children will be open and in receipt of a service and be tracked and involved and have an allocated worker. And the role of that audit will be looking at that activity that takes place around that case involving the work, looking at the pull push factors and looking at that activity, that relationship and those services.
Right, so they'll see the work of the social work team. I see, thank you. But how will that child be identified in the first place from children generally?
I would say as in the same way that any of the children that we work with identified, going back to the workers you met earlier in terms of it will be a contact or referral coming in through the front door via either a school, a family member or so forth. An assessment would likely to take place, and then that outcome of that assessment would lead to services or ongoing involvement from children's services. So it very much will follow that sort of journey through our teams.
All right, okay, thank you.
Just to add, if I may, that there are a lot of early indicators that children might be at risk of this type of exploitation, which are known nationally, and we continue to build on our knowledge of that. So, for example, children missing school, children going missing from home, a whole range of indicators, when you put them together, may suggest that a child's at increased risk of exploitation, and social workers and children's services staff are now much better sighted on early identification of those risks and being sighted on the possibility of exploitation. So it's an improving understanding of the issue, really.
Thank you for that, Mark, and also from Adam. Okay, so the recommendation is that the Ofsted Action Plan be noted, and we've also suggested quite rightly that the work of Mark and his team in helping to prepare this be recognised as well. Okay, so can we have a proposer? Phil, and seconder? Jane. Okay, all of those in favour. Thank you very much. Okay, and thank you everybody who's been involved in the post Ofsted plan. Agenda item 36. Okay, the schools update. That'll be Gillian. Okay, again, Gillian, we have all got copies of the schools update, and thank you very much for that. I do note, okay, that the very key issue again in your report is the exceptionality of the outstanding grade and all the support that's being offered to local schools in response to that change. And thank you very much, for all the work that you and your team are doing to support the schools with, with this. Is there anything that you would like to say by sort of way of overview or introduction to this, or we can go straight to any questions that people might have?
Thanks, Chair. I'll just draw attention to the 3 inspection reports that have been published since we last met. It's been a reasonably quiet period since we previously met in terms of school activity, given the summer holiday period. So not a huge update since we last met. Some changes to the Ofsted inspection framework that I've noted in the report for colleagues to be aware of. And as you've noted, Chair, those the challenges around those schools who are awaiting inspection, who are currently judged to be outstanding. So I'll move straight to questions.
Any questions? No? Okay, so the recommendation is that the schools update be noted. Do we have a proposer? Graham, seconder? Okay, Andrew. All those in favour? Thank you very much, and thank you, Gillian.
Thank you.
Agenda item 37, send and safety valve update. Is that Helen?
Chair, we've got Jonathan with us, who's just come on screen. Thank you.
Good evening, Jonathan. And again, welcome. And just a reminder that all the members of the committee have cited this report, okay, before the meeting. So, but anything you'd like to say by way of introduction or overview?
I would probably just summarise some of the key points. We are about to submit our second report. We do 3 reports a year to the DfE on our safety valve programme. We're reporting a fairly positive progress. I've had recent meetings with the DfE representatives, and they're satisfied with the progress we're making. I mean, it hasn't as yet had much financial impact, but in terms of the measures that we're taking to put in place, that everything's on track. So we're fairly, we're hearing fairly positive feedback from the DfE about their views of our performance around safety valve. As you'll note, we had that initial payment. We won't receive the second instalment of our safety valve funding until I think it's January, which will be after our submission of our 3rd report this year. I can take any questions on the individual work streams, but I won't dwell on those unless there are questions. Or the risk register, again, people have seen that I can answer questions about why certain items are highlighted red there, but I think that may be discussed last time, and nothing much has changed since the last time I reported, but happy to take questions on that. In terms of the SEND strategy, I did a report today to the SEND Partnership Board on progress on the SEND strategy. We're on course to have a first draft ready for consultation. I believe we'd like to bring it here at your next meeting, so that might be something for the forward plan, to bring a first or complete first draft of our SEND strategy, which I'd like to present here next time. Again, that's been produced in partnership with SEND Voices and other partners, so it's a co-produced document. Again, happy to take questions on that. And governance, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure the governance charts are set out. Again, I don't think there's much to really report particularly on there, but the governance arrangements for SEND Partnership Board have been thoroughly co-produced. I think there was a bit of pushback and back and forth in terms of refining those structures. We now think they're very reflective of that wider stakeholder engagement, reaching across to all partners and all our partners in health and so on. So it's a good and broad governance arrangements in place, and I think I'm happy to take any questions. I mean, I don't know if there are any particular questions on particular aspects of the safety valve programme or any other matters. Hopefully it's a fairly summary report, but at this stage, hopefully that covers the basis of what you need to know.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan. I see 2 hands up, Graham, and then Anne.
Yeah, it's a very, very small one, and I don't know if I'm clarifying the obvious or not. Under the strategy refresh and SEF, says fast pace of safety valve program development has placed a strain on relationship with partners. I just want to clarify what partners is.
Sure.
Do we mean?
I would say in particular, as I've said, we are striving to work within the realm of co-production. We want to work very closely with all partners in terms of jointly producing our action plans and so forth. When it came to negotiating safety valve with the DfE, it was so fast paced and so much back and forth between ourselves and the DfE that unfortunately, I'm sure Sarah would agree, we were barely able to keep all our partners up to speed with the speed of those negotiations. And as a consequence, I think a level of it didn't do anything for trust. It didn't do anything for that sort of spirit of transparency. But unfortunately, that was the nature of safety valve. There was no way of moving at the speed we were required to without just getting cracking, quite frankly. I believe we've been very transparent since that agreement was reached, and I hope Sarah would say that there's a feeling of understanding of where we're at now. But I just do feel that between October and March, when the thing was signed off, we were barely able to keep up with the pace of the demand. It was the most frenetic piece of activity I've ever been involved with, frankly. And I think our maintaining communication with partners did suffer as a result.
And the supplementary is there something that this committee or the council in general should be doing to help those relationships that have had friction?
Well, that probably is not for me to answer. You might well want to see what Sarah thinks. I would hope from our perspective, from the local authority officer perspective, we are building, certainly in terms of the partnership arrangements, for example, we have got a really good cross-section of involvement for all partners, both at sort of, from Parent Carer Forum. Our schools are well represented. We've got good joint representation from health colleagues too, which I think has been hard won, but we now have that. So I think things are on an improving footing, and I don't know that there's more can be done at this stage. But as I say, it was just worth acknowledging and understanding the context of safety valve itself was, I think, probably could be said to have done a little bit of damage to the trust in those relationships. I don't think that's beyond remedy, and hopefully we're making progress on building those relationships again now.
Very quickly then. So there are people here that speak English much better than what I does. So the safety valve program development had placed strain, not has placed.
Indeed.
I was trying to work out from what you were saying whether there's a current issue. It sounds as if we've stepped past it.
I'd welcome a comment from Sarah. I believe so and hope so, and I think our partners would agree. There's been a lot of deep level involvement in terms of getting the partnership and the governance arrangements right. I think you're right. That is a correct. I would probably agree that correction that I would place that in the past and say we've moved beyond that now.
Okay, so this matter will be noted, in the minutes. It will, though, be something which we will continue to monitor, because we do want to be sure, that any harms to that relationship that might have taken place, in the past is being repaired. But it's a very valid point, Graham. Thank you for that. Thank you, Jonathan. Sarah? Yes, briefly, please. Yeah.
Thank you, Jonathan. Lovely to be dropped in it. No, it is true. Relationships were strained because it was all very fast paced. We didn't feel that we were in the know around what was going on. The governance structure has been tricky navigation, I would say, at times. But to be fair, we all came to the table and we all worked through it. And we have, I think, come up with a much better, more robust, and hopefully Mark will agree with us on that. I feel that there's still some work to do. We're still working out how the partnership board is going to work together, but we've definitely got some more buy-in, particularly from our educational partners, because some of that had dropped off. So with the pace of work that was being done, information sort of dropped away and interest dropped away. So it's getting partners back to the table now to engage in the work as we move forward.
And of course, not to say, that circumstances might not change going forward, and produce strains again going forward. So we need to be alert, to that, and just draw on the experience, that we had, what was October through to May, and so forth. But it's a very, very important issue.
I would say we have a very good robust conversation arena. Is that the best way to put it, Jonathan? And I think we all navigate that really well.
Good. Would you say that's true of all the partners, though? I mean, perhaps it's an unfair question, but you see the point.
I certainly think there's opportunity for all partners to speak openly. Yeah.
Good. Good. Thank you very much. Anne, did you have a question?
Yes, I just wondered, under sufficiency and new provision, when the new special schools are expected to open. You've got an idea of that?
Yes, the current state of the project plan, it would still be aiming for a September 2026 launch date. There are a number of concerns. That's going to be tough going. It's not unachievable, but it's a very, very tight timescale. So we're monitoring that very, very closely. At the moment, there still remains to be seen whether the DfE will grant us permission to manage the capital programme ourselves as a local authority. They may do so, and we would significantly prefer that to be the case. We've had some real teething problems with Oak Tree, which is opened this week, in fact. The DfE managed that capital programme. We were 2 steps removed from the programme and project management around that capital construction, and it did not progress at the pace we would have wished. And there were a number of issues which we were unaware of until we pushed our nose in, so to speak. So we would much prefer to be managing that capital programme, and I think our prospect of delivering them in time will be significantly improved if we manage that ourselves. But it remains to be seen whether the DfE are going to grant us that permission.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question, and your comment about Oak Tree, Jonathan, I think is really, really interesting. So, thank you for that. Any other questions or comments at all about this agenda item? So the recommendation is that the committee notes the send and safety valve updates and thanks the officers, all the officers, for their production of those updates. Can we have a proposer? Graham, okay, and Jane, okay, and a seconder. Graham, thank you very much. All those in favour? Thank you very much indeed. Okay, agenda item 38, the forward programme. If we can just turn, where is it? There we go. Okay. If we could just take a look at pages 150, starting at 115. Now, there are 2 items that I would like to suggest that this committee considers adding to the forward programme, and I'd like your views. If you agree that this would be appropriate, I'd like your views on appropriate, and officers' views as well, on appropriate timings. The 2 items, the Send Voices annual survey for 2023, which I believe now has been, copies have been emailed to all members of this committee late this afternoon. It's the second time that we have seen such an annual survey. It's extremely informative, indeed, and I think that it is indeed. I think that when we looked at the 2022 survey, I think it was a very, very useful, exercise for us all. So I would like us to consider including that in the forward programme. Helen?
Yes, Chair, thank you, and would totally agree and endorse that. I'm just wondering, we had the Send strategic partnership this afternoon, and within that we were looking at the development of the Send strategy. I wonder whether we could, given the overview aspects of this committee, bring into the next agenda, the next meeting, the 1st of November meeting, a report that would incorporate the Send Voices survey within the remit of the draft Send strategy. So in effect, we cover it all. in one report. Because we're doing a lot of work at the moment on developing the SEND strategy as a whole system partnership agenda, and actually bringing it in draft to this committee would be really helpful.
Sarah, do you think that would work?
Yes, so it's important that the feedback from the lived experience is incorporated into that strategy. So yes, that would work. And in the interim, Terry and I are always happy to answer any questions. It is a big report. It's a lot to digest.
Thank you. That seems to be a very sensible, approach. So we will agree to add that to the agenda for the 1st of November. Thank you very much. The second item that I'd like to suggest we consider to add to the forward programme is in light of some comments which were made earlier today, this evening, about early help and a report on the early help provision within the council. Do any of the officers have any thoughts, advice as to when that might be most appropriately included in the? Well, firstly, sorry, I've jumped the gun a bit. Is everybody in agreement, in looking at early help in the forward programme? Exactly. Okay, so any officer thoughts? If not tonight, okay, then what I would like to suggest is that the officers get back to myself and to Ian as vice chair, with some suggestions, and then we will communicate them before finalising any decision to the other members of the committee. Is everybody happy with that? Okay.
Thank you. Yes, we'll come back to you, Chair, very quickly.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. If we look at page 115, okay, with the additional agenda item for the 1st of November, and then the next meeting after that is the 8th of January, then the 20th of March. Okay. I'm being quite presumptuous. I didn't ask if there was any other items that people wanted to or would like to suggest be added to the forward programme. No? Okay. So that's agenda item 38. Agenda item 39, the action tracker. That's pages 117 and 118. Now, I must admit, I've been a little bit negligent. I didn't go back through minutes of previous meetings to just check to see when we initiated, the action trackers. I note that this action tracker only covers the last 2 meetings. Okay. I think it's important, okay, going forward, that the action tracker includes all meetings, okay, at least for the previous 12 months or so, just so that there will be some items that might have been signed off as being completed, perhaps in a previous meeting, that could re-emerge or be worthy of revisiting, perhaps. So if we could just bear that in mind. I do note also, and I don't know whether anybody's able to answer this tonight, if not, perhaps outside of the meeting, in the 20th of June meeting, we did ask that the leader of the council write to the Secretary of State, this is in relation to USCs, the leader of the council write to the Secretary of State and MPs to lobby for an increase in grants to cover the full cost of supporting USC care leavers. There's also, I don't know whether that has happened or not.
Chair, I know we have if Adam's online, there was certainly a letter. The letter has been prepared If it hasn't gone, it can be arranged for it to go, subject to appropriate sign off very quickly. The complexity has been we've had various high court rulings and other things in the interim.
Okay.
Just to get some
thank you for that explanation, Helen. There's also in the same meeting a request that an invitation be sent to all members to attend the virtual to invite them to virtual school governing body meetings. And again, I don't know whether that had been followed up. If not, I think it would be a very
we haven't we haven't had one yet. So
okay.
I can give the date now to members, and happy to be contacted if any member would like to attend. The date of the meeting is Tuesday, the 26th of September, at 4:30 p.m. It's held virtually. So we can extend invitations to any members who would like to attend that.
That's wonderful. If that could also be done in email.
Yes, we'll
to the members.
we'll send the
Thank you,
Teams invite round. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. So that was agenda item 39, the action tracker. Item 40, part 2. Okay, exclusion of the public. That under section 100A, brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act as amended as appropriate. Can you confirm that? Oh, I beg your pardon. Okay. So we can we have a raise in hands? Can you please raise your hand? Okay, if you're in favour of that. Thank you very much.